So I'd like to resume our City of Bloomington budget hearings for the 2022 budget. And I think we did do a roll call yesterday, so let's go ahead and do a roll call this evening as well. Do we have somebody from the clerk's office to do that? Susan, Ms. Stoll, please go ahead.
Councilmember Rallo.
Here.
Councilmember Bolin.
Here.
Rosenbarger.
Here.
Scambolari.
Here.
Sims.
Here.
Flaherty. Piedmont Smith.
Here.
Smith.
Here.
And Sandberg.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
believe Councilmember Flaherty will be joining us a little bit later. He had a conflict with the class he's teaching. So this evening, we are going to be discussing the following budgets: Bloomington Transit, utilities, the fire department, and the police department. And as part of the police department budget, we will also touch upon central dispatch. So let's go ahead and get started with Bloomington Transit. And I think we have Mr. Lou May here, hopefully, for one more time to present the Bloomington Transit budget. Welcome, Mr. May.
Thank you. I'm having some technical difficulties sharing my screen right now. I'm working with Heather to figure those out. How would you, I'm trying to, without you being able to see my screen now, I'm at a little bit of a disadvantage. How would you like me to proceed?
Does somebody else have your presentation that could perhaps share their screen? Ms. Lacy, do you have it?
I'm not able to access it. He did send it to me, but I was hoping Elizabeth was going to be on the call. Just one second.
Okay, yeah, we can wait.
And Madam Chair, my apologies. I'm having internet issues too. So if I cut out and have to cut back in, please forgive me.
Oh, no problem.
Hey, Lou, this is Andrew from the mayor's office. I think I have it if you want me to share it for you and you just tell me when to proceed.
That would be great, Andrew.
All right.
Ms. Lacy, could I just ask, did we have times set for each of the presenters this evening?
Yes, we do. So Transit will have 25 minutes and I will start the timer when the presentation starts, if that's all right.
Yes, thank you. Did you say 20 minutes?
25.
25 minutes, okay. Very good. So Mr. May, whenever you're ready.
All right, thank you very much. By way of introductions, I'm Lou May. I'm General Manager for the Bloomington Public Transportation Corporation. Thank you for the opportunity to present our 2022 budget to the council tonight. And as Councilmember Piedmont Smith mentioned, this will be the final budget that I present on behalf of Bloomington Transit. It's actually the 23rd budget that I've presented in total over the years now. And I do want to say it's been a great honor and privilege to work with all of you over these years. And I appreciate the support and advocacy that you've all displayed for Bloomington Transit and public transportation. You've been great to work with, and I truly am going to miss each and every one of you. I also want to give a shout out to Bloomington Transit's Chief Financial Officer and Controller, Krista Browning, who has been with us for 17 years and has really done all the work in the last 17 budgets that I've presented to you. She's done an extraordinary job, and I appreciate what she's done. And again, kudos to Krista for all her hard work in putting together the 2022 budget. Our proposed budget that I'm presenting to you tonight has been reviewed and approved by our board of directors. And under state law, the Common Council annually reviews and adopts our budget as well. As part of my comments tonight, I'll cover some of the notable transit accomplishments over the past year. I'll talk about some of the goals for this upcoming budget year. I'll share the proposed budget for 2022 with you, and also discuss some of the challenges and opportunities that we'll be facing at Bloomington Transit. If I could advance to the next slide. Ooh, thank you. First, let me talk a little bit about our vision and purpose. Our vision is connecting people to places. Our purpose is here to deliver safe and quality transportation to the Bloomington community, to contribute toward economic and social improvement, to advocate for increased investment in public transportation, and manage our public resources efficiently and effectively. Next slide, please. This is a slide that I have shared every year since I've been here as part of my budget presentation. It will be familiar to most of you, I think. To set the context for the 2022 budget, transit ridership is one of the measuring sticks that's used to gauge transit performance. And this graphic goes back to 1984 and goes all the way through last year, 2020, our last full year that we completed. The trend has been upward in transit ridership. Last year was an extraordinary anomaly. The pandemic for most of the year, about 9 months, 8.5 months or so of the year were affected, and transit ridership across the world, across the country, across Indiana was greatly impacted. We lost a little bit over 50% of our normal ridership. A big reason for that was the fact that Indiana University went to an online class format around spring break of last year and stayed in that mode throughout all of 2020. As I've looked at other transit systems across the state, the typical decrease is in the range of 40 to 60% in terms of transit ridership decline. Go to the next slide, please. Again, another illustration or graphic that I show each year at budget time is our ridership per capita for the last full year, 2020. This compares the 8 largest urban areas in the state. And over the last 5 years or so, Bloomington Transit has been the highest per capita ridership, and we remained that way in 2020 in spite of the pandemic. Really, if you had looked at this graphic from the previous year, if you basically doubled everyone's ridership, this would be a pretty accurate depiction for last year. Again, transit systems have been greatly impacted by the pandemic. Next slide. So I'll talk a little bit about the accomplishments over the past year, and I think we may have skipped a slide here. There we go. Under the heading of climate change in the environment, I'm pleased to report that we've taken delivery of 2 battery electric buses, and we've installed 2 charging stations. The photo that you see in the slide here is a picture of the first battery electric bus from July. I'm also pleased to report that we have won another competitive federal grant for the purchase of 4 additional battery electric buses and charging stations, and that will be included in the 2022 budget that I'll talk about in just a minute. Just in the last month, we've awarded a contract for the conduct of an alternative fuels and infrastructure assessment study that will map out or chart our transition of our fleet to alternative fuels, and also look at the greater use of solar power, potentially to help supplement our alternatively fueled fleet. Another important accomplishment for us at our Grimes Lane facility, our physical plant here, we've installed a second high efficiency boiler, as well as installed a white roof at the facility, which will help us in our efforts to be more eco-friendly. Next slide, please. In the area of customer service, I want to give a shout out to the city of Bloomington and their Recover Forward funding. The city was good enough to help fund a number of improvements, bus stop accessibility improvements around the community. And this work is underway and will soon be completed. But the goal is to improve sidewalk accessibility, disabled and handicapped accessibility at stops. And you can see in the photograph here, there's a stop at Graham and Rockport at the Country View Apartments that's currently under construction there to improve accessibility. We've also implemented online reservation capability for our BTA Access clients who wish to take advantage of this convenience. They can, instead of having to make a phone call, they can simply make their reservations online. And again, that's a convenience factor that makes it easier to use our BTA Access service. We've also negotiated agreements with 2 new apartment complex developments to provide transit service starting in the fall of next year. And that is in the development at the old Motel 6 site on North Walnut Street, as well as the development on West 17th Street. And we're looking forward to having our first privately funded general public transit services for those developments. Next slide. Recover Forward. The pandemic has dominated much of our efforts in the past year. We've taken a whole litany of measures to safeguard employee and public safety over the past year. One of the things that, one of the impacts of the pandemic has been exacerbating what was already a critical employee shortage for us and made it much harder to recruit and hire new employees. And we, even prior to the pandemic, we had a driver shortage, and now it has been made much worse. So we've had to take a couple of measures, including implementing a $3,000 hiring bonus, as well as a $3,000 employee referral incentive that to help us recruit new employees for vacancies and openings here. We're currently down about a dozen drivers, and that affects our ability to put service out on a daily basis. In concert with our AFSCME local, we've also agreed to increase the entry-level wage for fixed route drivers by $2 an hour. And that change has just taken place, and our new starting wage for fixed route drivers is $18.32 an hour. And our hats off to AFSCME for working with us on that. Next slide. We do have some unfinished business as far as 2021 goes and budget goals. We have explored the possibility of developing and implementing a microtransit, or what we call a general public on-demand service. We held a public hearing over the summer and received public comments on the possibility of replacing the 8 Eastside local with a on-demand service that would be operated using existing Uber and Lyft type service. And our board considered the public comments that were made through the public input process and ultimately decided not to move forward with that, based on most of the public comments tended to disfavor the proposed concept of using Uber and Lyft. But regardless of that, we haven't given up on the concept of microtransit and, again, a general public on-demand service. We're looking at other alternatives where we might consider a different model to provide a microtransit service. One of those models might be to operate the service in-house. Another model would be to possibly fully contract that service out in a turnkey fashion. Another model might be to commingle the riders with our existing BT access service. So over the remaining months of the year, we're going to explore those concepts, and we still hope to implement an on-demand service before the end of the year and continue it as part of the 2022 budget, which I'll talk about shortly. And then, as I mentioned, as part of this year's budget, we have a line item in the capital portion of our budget to acquire 4 additional electric buses and charging stations. So before the end of this year, we will place an order for those vehicles, and hopefully we would see those vehicles arrive somewhere near the end of next year. Next slide, please. So I wanted to summarize the proposed 2022 budget for you and how it compares to the 2021 budget. Overall, we're proposing a budget of $15,114,394 compared to the 2021 budget, which was $14,505,793, and that's a 4.2% increase. You can see here how each of the budget categories is proposed to change. Next slide, please. So I'll talk a little bit about the budget goals that make up the 2022 proposed budget. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we were the recipients of a competitive federal grant of about $3.2 million that will fund 80% of the cost of 4 new electric buses and charging stations. So that is included as a primary element of the 2022 budget. And that order for those vehicles would be placed sometime during the next budget year. Also, as I mentioned previously, we've awarded a contract to complete and to undertake an alternative fuels and infrastructure assessment study. This study will provide our board with a blueprint to follow in terms of what alternative forms might be best suited for our operation. It could very well be a single form, such as battery electric vehicles, or it could actually be a mix of more than one form. We'll also look at the potential of using additional solar at our Grimes Lane facility to help complement whatever form of alternative fuel that the board will pursue. We anticipate this study will get underway this year and should be completed by mid-year next year. Next one, please. In the area of customer service, one of the budget goals for 2022 is to implement the recommendations of our route optimization study, which was completed in 2019 in an effort to improve the design of our fixed route network. The implementation of those recommendations was postponed with the onset of the pandemic, but we still hope to do that as part of the 2022 budget. Purpose of that will be to, again, improve the design of our route network, improve the reliability, especially in terms of on-time performance, and also improve and increase ridership coming out of the pandemic. We also hope to continue an on-demand mobility pilot project, a microtransit project, again, with possible implementation in late 2021, and continue that. We've budgeted about $250,000 in our 2022 budget to continue that project. Also, as part of the 2022 budget, we have what we call phase 2 of our bus stop accessibility improvements. We were able to win another federal competitive grant in the amount of $100,000 that we'll use to continue the improvement of accessibility at various bus stops in the community. And then lastly, under customer service, we have one new position proposed in the 2022 budget, and that is to create a new road supervisor position to help enhance service quality on the street. Next slide, please. We have a number of small capital projects that are a part of the 2022 budget. $250,000 for various facility repairs and replacements at our Grimes Lane facility. This includes replacing oil water separators for our storm water drainage system, to replace our building HVAC automation system at $80,000, building security at, I believe, $30,000, and replacement of our diesel fueling stations. We also have 2 BT Access vehicles due to be replaced as part of the 2022 budget at $100,000 or $150,000. I mentioned the bus stop accessibility improvements at $100,000. And then we have a small capital project of $30,000 to add some additional cameras in our fixed route fleet. Next slide, please. Typically each year I present a pie chart that summarizes our expenses, and I'll show you one shortly on revenue. This shows you where the money goes in terms of expenses for the 2022 budget. The majority of 43% is in personnel, 34.5% capital, 12.3% services, 5.8% fuel and oil, and 4.3% for parts and supplies. Next slide, please. On the revenue side of our 2022 budget, we're proposing the local property tax to increase 4.3% compared to the 2021 budget. Good news to report that the state public mass transit fund is going to be up about 15% compared to the 2021 budget. You may recall from the 2021 budget last year, we had the unfortunate thing to report that the state and NDOT was going to be cutting state transit assistance by about 13% last year, and they did. We're pleased to see that that money has been replaced and some, and again, we're looking to enjoy about a 15% increase compared to last year's budget. Passenger fares are budgeted to remain the same compared to the 2021 budget at $400,000. We do have federal CARES Act funds of about $2.4 million budgeted as part of the 2022 budget. And then federal American Rescue Plan funds of about $2.2 million are also included as part of the 2022 budget. We've got federal competitive funds of about $3.5 million. Most of that will go to the electric bus grant and project that we were successful in winning. We also have federal 5310 competitive grants of $250,000 that will cover the bus stop accessibility improvements as well as the replacement of 2 BT Access vehicles. So we have a total of $8.5 million in federal funds. That represents about 56% of our total revenue to balance the 2022 budget. And if you combine federal and state funds, we have a total of just over $11 million, and that represents about 73% of the total revenue for the 2022 budget. Next slide, please. This pie chart shows where the revenue comes from. Again, 56% from federal, state at 16.9% make up the 2 biggest pie slices, followed by property tax at just under 10%, IU revenues at just under 9%, other local taxes at 4%, passenger fares 2.6%, and advertising miscellaneous at 1% each. Next slide, please. Talk a little bit about some of the challenges facing us, long-term and short-term impacts of COVID-19. The labor market shortage has been exacerbated over the past year. It will be critical that we're able to hire drivers and others to fill vacant positions that we have. We're in a good position now that we'll be negotiating a new collective bargaining agreement with our ASME union there. And I very much expect that we will be increasing wages and benefits to deal with this shortage of employees. This shortage is not unique to Bloomington Transit. All transit systems are dealing with this. And in many cases, it's at a critical stage for most transit systems. Most driving positions in whatever industry it may be are also dealing with the same shortage of drivers. Ridership recovery is going to be important to us. We think it's going to take several years before we can completely recover our ridership. But as the pandemic hopefully wanes here, and as IU has returned to in-person classes, hopefully we're going to see that recovery begin in the latter half of this year. Expanding our revenue sources is, I think we all agree that we want to grow and expand transit service, especially given the climate change issues that we're facing here in this country and around the world. It will take additional investments, and that's going to be a significant challenge as we face going forward. We're also interested in IU enrollment and how the pandemic may change travel patterns permanently, possibly. We're getting our first taste this week as the IU fall semester has begun, and it will be interesting to follow any changes that may take place and how that develops over the next few months. Again, we have a challenge of transitioning to an alternatively fueled fleet as we try to get away from fossil fueled vehicles and convert our fleet to something else. That is going to bring with it significant infrastructure cost and needed resources in order to fund that to the tune of millions, possibly tens of millions of dollars. And is probably going to also require the expansion of our Grimes Lane physical plant. Next slide, please. Opportunities that we have before us, 2022 and beyond, the route network redesign, we think will greatly improve transit and reliability of our service. We're looking forward to implementing our first on-demand mobility innovation. We're looking forward to launching our first privately funded transit service to new developments, and that could be a model for additional new developments in the future. The Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act has the potential to add a lot of new funding for public transportation. We're optimistic that will happen when Congress finally passes a bill, and hopefully the president signs that, and we could see a big infusion of additional funding. We're hopeful. Also included in that act will be the increased federal investment in electric vehicles. The early elements of that bill, it appears the federal government will have a significant increased investment in electric vehicles and infrastructure. We know the city will soon be discussing the annexation issue and hopefully making a decision on that. That potentially could lead to some new transit service in newly annexed areas. And then lastly, the mayor mentioned just before the pandemic began, the prospect of possible new local funding for transit. We're very interested in working with the city towards that goal. Next slide, please. So here is again your proposed 2022 budget. And with that, I would be glad to entertain any comments or questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. May. And just before we go into questions, I wanted to say that we're going to use the same format that we started with last night, where we have 3 minutes per round of questions for the question and the answers. I did request of Ms. Lacey to turn off the volume on our timer because sometimes it kind of flusters folks when the timer goes off and you're still in the middle of a sentence. But please do try to stick with the time. We'll be able to see the timer, I believe. So Councilmember Rallo, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Director May. I guess I've worked with you for 19 of those 23 budgets. And I really appreciate all the work that you've done, and it's really bear a lot of fruit. Congratulations on the federal grants you described. I guess my first question is kind of a perpetual one that we that we address now and then, and that is, do you and your board discuss and consider the possible implementation of free fares? And kind of a corollary with that, it seems to me that that would consist of only a few $100,000 of your budget, as I see your revenue. And if it results in higher ridership, because I could see that you'd reached a peak just prior to the pandemic, and kind of, there was a plateau there. I wonder if that would result in higher ridership because of ease of use. So you could just step on a bus without thinking about any fares, and whether that would leverage greater state and federal funding.
Great question. It's one that I've gotten several times over the years from council. I think perhaps from you, Councilmember Rollo. Of course, during the pandemic, starting at the very beginning of the pandemic, all the way through July the 1st of this year, we did go to a free fare structure. The purpose of that was to help safeguard our employees primarily. We did that in tandem with moving, boarding, and alighting of buses to the rear doors instead of the front doors in order to build some distancing between our drivers and our passengers there as a way to safeguard their health and safety there. I think we've always been interested in the possibility of free fares. It's about $400,000 for the general public fares. Roughly $1 million on the IU side there. If there could be a reliable revenue stream that would replace those revenues, I think my board would be very interested in doing that.
Well, what about this idea of higher ridership and then therefore getting more support? Is that possible? Am I wrong in assuming that might be a possibility?
Not on the state side anymore. The state funding formula was changed a number of years ago, in which no longer ridership and performance and productivity of the system no longer leads to additional state funding in any significant way. We had always done very well when the formula promoted that, but again, the formula has been frozen and we're not realizing any additional state funding as a result of gains in ridership. On the federal side, there are some relatively small additional funds through the Transit Intensive Cities program. But again, those are relatively small. They're less than $1 million on an annual basis. We're already receiving some of those funds. In fact, I think we qualify for 3 out of 6 factors based on our performance already. So there's only maybe $500,000 that potentially could be had.
Thank you, Mr. May. I guess we're over time. Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Other questions for Mr. May on the Bloomington Transit budget? Councilmember Rosenbarger.
Thank you, and thank you for that presentation, Mr. May. Could you give a little more detail about that new position that you're creating, the Road Supervisor?
Yes, so we would like to create a new position of a road supervisor or street supervisor who would basically spend his or her time on the street, observing the operation, observing the vehicles in service, reviewing driver performance. Are they obeying traffic laws? Are they adhering to schedules? Observing overall driver skills on the street. Are they complying with operational policies that we may have? But there's a number of things that happen during the course of a normal day where it would be helpful to have a road supervisor, whether it's responding to detours that come up as a result of road construction or otherwise. Sometimes buses will get bunched up due to traffic conditions on the road, and street supervisor would be helpful to have to deal with those kind of issues. Sometimes we get customer related problems that require a supervisor to respond to the scene. Having somebody on the street would help for a faster and more responsive way to deal with those issues. Sometimes we get stranded passengers who, for whatever reason, have missed a bus, and it would be great to have a street supervisor out there who might be able to actually pick them up and get them to where they're going. We have all kinds of issues and private parking lots where we go, whether it's shopping centers or apartment complexes where buses sometimes get stuck due to parked vehicles. Street supervisor would be able to more quickly respond to the scene and deal with those issues. And then, of course, sometimes our vehicles are involved in accidents, and it would be helpful for us to have a street supervisor ready and available to deal with those kind of things. So overall, it's a quality control issue that we're looking to help improve. And we've budgeted about $50,000 in wages for this new position.
That sounds wonderful. Thank you. And then just, I guess, piggybacking off Councilmember Rollo a little with fare-free transit. I know we've talked, and one of the obstacles is that IU pays in so much for the students to ride for free. Have you had any conversations with IU then, sort of like contributing in a different way, that like they're still contributing that $1 million since we are providing that transit for campus, like, but they would just pay it in like a different budget kind of thing?
Yeah, we have, during the pandemic, we had to deal with them on this. You know, we reduced service to the IU campus, especially given that classes were being held online. So we prorated the funding that the university would normally provide based on the actual service levels. That was encouraging to us. They could have said, well, you're providing free fares to everyone, why not include our students? And they didn't do that. So we were encouraged by that.
All right, Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, Ms. Piedmont Smith. Mr. May, thank you very much for all you've done. You've done a fantastic job. I've been here a while, so you really have done a good job of stewardship.
Thank you.
What can you tell us a little bit about why the board decided not to move ahead on kind of looking at microtransit for our future thinking about that?
Yeah, and just to clarify, they opted not to move ahead with the replacement of this particular route with microtransit, and it was based on the public comments that we received both at the public hearing, but in online surveys and emails and phone calls that we got during the public comment process there. This route especially caters to senior citizens. So for example, the Cambridge Square apartments on Pete Ellis Drive are big users of this route. And many of them communicated to us that they had concerns. They may not necessarily know how to use a smartphone in order to order an Uber or Lyft vehicle. They may not have a credit card in order, or an account with Uber and Lyft, and aren't familiar with how to use that service. They expressed some concerns that frankly we weren't expecting. For example, if you've used Uber and Lyft, you know that you have the option to tip the driver there, and they expressed a concern to us that with this subsidized service that Uber and Lyft drivers might be hesitant to serve these customers if they thought they weren't going to get a tip from them. So that's something that we had never considered, and it was something we heard from the public and the board took into consideration. The affordability of it was an issue also that people brought up. A lot of senior citizens and people with disabilities pay a discounted fare to use our fixed route service. They're paying 50 cents instead of $1. And we had proposed a flat $1 passenger fare for the Uber and Lyft service. And some people actually get to ride fixed route for free if you're certified as BT Access eligible. If you will use fixed route service instead of BT Access, your ride is free. So people were suddenly going to have to be paying a higher cost, and the affordability was a concern to them. So those are some of the things that we heard from the public, and I think those were things that affected the board's decision on this.
Thank you, Mr. May.
Councilmember Scamballeri.
Yes, thank you. A little more on microtransit, just to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. It sounds like the answer to microtransit isn't no, it's just probably not in that route. Am I reading that correctly?
That's it, exactly.
Good. Okay. I'm a fundraiser in my day job, so I'm always glad to hear that outside money is funding something in the city of Bloomington. So I have a couple of questions on that. In terms of federal grants, we seem to be doing well in that regard, and we seem to be receiving a fair amount of funding pretty consistently. Is there anything else you would recommend we do to position ourselves better? It sounds like our ridership is competitive. We're environmentally conscious. Is there anything else you'd recommend we consider to position ourselves?
Yeah, I think I can. As you probably know, as part of our budget, that there is no city funding included in the Bloomington Transit budget, and it's been that way from day one. We were encouraged when Mayor Hamilton, just before the pandemic, proposed some possible new funding that might be used to invest in strategies to help address the issue of climate change. And one of them would possibly be to help fund the expansion of Bloomington Transit services so as to encourage people to use public transportation as opposed to driving. So we certainly would encourage the city in that same endeavor. The mayor has expressed to me recently that he's interested in continuing that discussion in the near future here. And we're hopeful here at Bloomington Transit that something can happen on that front.
Great, that's helpful. Thank you. And also, I was pleased to hear about the negotiations that resulted in some new routes for the new developments that we're going to be seeing around town. What, just for my own information, what are the elements of that negotiation? What are the negotiation points? Is it frequency of route? Is it type of bus? Is it? How does that
Actually, most of those issues were settled in the city council approval of those developments as part of your conditional approvals that you did for these. And I think both developments were over a year ago at council. A condition of approval was that the development fully fund a contract with Bloomington Transit to provide a shuttle service between those developments to the IU campus there. So at that time, we talked to the developers about the route, the frequency of service, the number of days that it would operate, and reached some basic agreements on those. And then after the council did their final approvals, we negotiated the terms and conditions of the contracts with those developers.
Good. And are there any other such conversations underway right now with any of the new developments?
No, but we would certainly encourage the council as you consider new private developments in the future, especially developments that may have large densities of students that will be commuting to and from the IU campus, that you potentially talk with us about those developments and see if there's a good potential for something similar.
Great. Thank you very much.
Are there other first round questions for Mr. May? Council President Sims.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation, Mr. May. What I'd really like to say to get started is thank you for your service. And as you look forward to your new phase in life, and we think you've been wonderful, at least with my time on the council. I think my colleagues would say the same. But as far as your accessibility, and even before I was on the council, I really appreciated the time that you took to discuss things with me. In many cases, and particularly if there were some social issues, that you took the time to call me. That is something beyond the business acumen that I really, really appreciate. And I'm going to miss that. So thank you very much. My question is, you've indicated that for budgeting purposes, you're projecting 6% less revenue from IU. And you indicated that the 2021 budget estimates were too high. Can you expound on that a little bit? And did the pandemic have some, obviously it did, but can you explain that a little bit?
The pandemic did. When we projected our 2021 budget, we simply, again, budgeting is not an exact science, and we make our best estimates as to what the revenue is going to be for all of our sources. Very seldom do we hit it to the dollar or to the penny. And in the case last year of IU, we over projected that. And as a result, the 2022 budget is showing about 6% less. Again, it's not a real cut to IU funding.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. So we're just adjusting the budgeting. as
Correct.
opposed to actual revenue flow.
Correct.
Okay, thank you very much. Another thing you indicated, and I know this is a very small part of the overall budget, but the advertising sales. And many of us noticed the bus with the wraps and the different logos and that sort of thing. And it's a 40% increase that you've indicated over last year. How big or how much larger do you foresee that happening? Or have we reached pretty much the limits?
Yeah, we're close to being fully saturated on buses. I'm sure you've noticed over the last 5 years since we've had this new advertising contractor, there's been a big increase in the number of wrap buses and advertising. This contractor has been very aggressive and very assertive in selling it and has done a great job for us. And revenues have exceeded our projections on it. We're showing about a 40% increase. We think that's a conservative estimate for next year. It's probably going to exceed that even, given the trend that we're seeing in advertising sales. But again, we're very close to being maxed out. So they're unless we grow the number of buses in our fleet, there's probably not a whole lot of additional potential.
Okay, thank you. And I was getting at, it seems as though part of that could be used to offset some of the passenger fares if we're talking about free fares moving on down the line. Because obviously you'll have to think of something creative to replace that revenue, however small it is. So thank you for the presentation. I believe my time is up. Thank you.
Are there other first round questions for Mr. May? I have a couple of, so I wanted to inquire about the increased security at the bus station that was cited in your memo. I don't remember the dollar amount offhand, but could you speak a little bit to that? Why that, what the amount was, and who provides security there?
Actually, what that is, it's not at our downtown station, it's at our Grimes Lane facility here. And $50,000 is the amount that we have budgeted. And what that simply is for is to put electronic locks on all the doors of our building here. We have that on our downtown transit center. I think you have that at City Hall as well, where you have a key card that you use to gain access to different doors and rooms within the facility. We do not have that at our Grimes Lane facility. What we've noticed since the Beeline Trail has opened, we've seen a much greater influx of people coming off of the trail and just kind of mysteriously appearing in our facility at different places. And it's spoken to the need to increase security at our building and in the various rooms. So we propose to put electronic locks on all of our doors.
So not just the external doors, but also inside.
Correct.
Okay. And then I also wanted to inquire, speaking of the Grimes Lane facility, you said you're planning to investigate expansion there. And I know you and I have had conversations about it being kind of landlocked, that there's not really room to expand. Are there other options that we're not thinking of, or are neighboring property owners perhaps going to be more flexible as far as selling?
Yeah, we haven't begun any conversations with neighboring property owners. However, we think there could be some potential for adjacent properties to our east. So, for example, the old Harley Davidson retail store on South Walnut Street, which I think comes close to touching our property here, I think is for sale right now. There is an automobile junkyard to the north of us and northeast that might, who knows, might be potentially available. This could be a better and higher use for that, I suppose. We'd have to take the environmental considerations into account as well. As part of the study that we're doing, that we've just awarded the contract to, we've asked the consultants to develop potential site plans. If we're going to have to expand our physical plant if we're going to grow transit service, or we're going to have to build another physical plant, or maybe move this plant to a different location that has larger space to it. when you talk about building a second facility somewhere, you're talking about major expenses, probably in the tens of millions of dollars. And hopefully it will be a magnitude lower than that if we can acquire some additional properties adjacent to us here. We do have the Clear Creek that runs right alongside our property there. So that's a concern, and that's a factor that we have to take into account there, as well as flooding that potentially could come from that. But that will be a part of the study that we've just started to identify what and how much additional property we may need to expand the facility.
Thank you. Other questions? Starting round two. Councilmember Rallo.
Director May, a couple of quick questions. One is regarding the number 8, which was the proposed micro transit service. Will it remain a route until the decision is made?
Yes, it will continue. So, no plans to change it immediately. Now, I will say, if we move ahead with implementing our route optimization study recommendations, one of the recommendations from that study was to do a consolidation of routes on the east side. And that would include Route 8, Route 3, and Route 9 on the east side, and create a new Route 90, which would be a bi-directional service that would operate on, for example, some of the streets that Route 8 operates on, such as Pete Ellis there. So that very well could take the place of Route 8 as well as Route 3 and Route 9 if it comes to pass.
I see. Would that include going down Sarah Road south of Morse Pike?
Well, Sarah Road is served by a different route, at least south of Rogers. The service that we have on Route 8 between Morse Pike and East Rogers has almost no ridership on it whatsoever on Route 8 right now. So we don't think that necessarily merits service based on the experience that we've had. On Sarah Road south of East Rogers, we have Route 5 that serves that area all the way down to Jackson Creek Middle School.
Okay. We had you were implementing bus stops a couple per year. Is that still continuing?
I'm sorry.
Renovating bus stops.
Yeah, again, we're using a combination of Recover Forward funds that the city has provided, as well as our own local dollars to improve accessibility at a number of bus stops all throughout the city right now. And we plan to continue that as part of the 2022 budget using 100% federal grant funds that we were able to acquire for that.
Terrific. And what's the expected longevity of the electric bus, of an electric bus?
Well, they're a 12-year minimum of 12 years, but it's unusual for us to keep a bus only for 12 years. I wouldn't be surprised if they go longer than that, could easily go 14 or 15 or more years. Now, the battery technology, I don't expect to get 12 years out of the OEM batteries that are on the vehicle. They will probably have to be replaced at some point during the life of the vehicle.
Okay, but that can happen. You can replace the battery and maintain the bus. Great, thank you.
Other second round questions for Mr. May? Councilmember Smith.
Thank you. Mr. May, will you offer me your opinion on, so there's potential annexation on the table with expansion of the city borders. How do we think about that when we consider services and budget for the transit system? Can you just offer me some of your wisdom?
Sure, absolutely. The city has asked me to make some estimates as to what areas proposed to be annexed would potentially warrant transit service. So we looked at it from two perspectives. One, we provide our BT access service currently to everywhere in the city, everywhere within the city boundaries. So our expectation would be we would provide BT access service to all the newly annexed areas there. But secondly, we looked at the areas proposed to be annexed and what areas might warrant the provision of fixed route service. And there are a couple of areas that I think are on our radar screen. One is the Ivy Tech Cook Industrial Park on the west side there. I think that's annexation area 1A, as I recall. And rural transit used to service that, but at the start of the pandemic, they discontinued their service, and now it has no transit service to that area. So if it was annexed into the city, I think it would be important for Bloomington Transit to provide service to that. So we've included those cost estimates and given those here recently to the city so they understand what will be involved there. Then the other area that we're interested in providing fixed route service to, I think, is area 1B, which is to the southwest. That is the South Rogers, Fullerton Pike area, Bachelor Heights Middle School area down there. You've got a fairly significant residential concentration down there that we think would warrant providing fixed route service. So we have included those as a cost to provide that service as part of our overall annexation cost.
Is there a number that you can share with us about what that means as far as cost?
Yeah, I don't have it off the top of my head here, but I'm glad to share it with you and let you know what our estimates are for costs for all three of those costs: BT access service and the two areas for fixed route service.
Thank you, Mr. May. I appreciate it.
Councilmember Sandberg.
Thank you, Mr. May. It's been a pleasure working with you. We will sorely miss you during next year's budget round. My question to you is, would you like to make a pitch for those dozen or so drivers that you are in need of? What do they need to do? How do they need to apply? What are you looking for in a good driver?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to make that sales pitch. If you're out there and you're needing a job, do we have a job for you? We will start you at $18.32 an hour. We'll train you. We'll give you paid training to get your commercial driver's license. That process will take anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks before we'll have you ready to drive solo behind the wheel. We have good benefits that we can provide you as well. And it's interesting, if there are people out there that are looking for a job, please talk to us. You can go to our website and submit an application online, or you can drop in at our Grimes Lane facility and fill out an application and leave it with us. We also have a $3,000 hiring incentive right now in place. So if that serves as some additional incentive, hopefully so that you can benefit from.
Nicely done, sir. You are a gentleman and a professional.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Yes, Councilmember Rosenbarger.
Thank you. I'm wondering if I should sign up for that. Okay, I just want to ask Mr. May, like, from answers to other folks, other council members, it sounds like you're like the idea of expanding transit, that's something we really, really need to be working on. But we have huge barriers that of like not having enough buses and then not having enough plants. And like, is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, to grow transit in the Bloomington community, we're going to have to first solve our employee shortage issue. That's probably first and foremost there. But we're going to need additional investment in transit. And we're hopeful that we're going to see a big shot in the arm from the infrastructure bill that Congress is currently debating. There has been talk of significant increased federal investment in public transportation. So that could be a good starting point to help grow transit service here in Bloomington. But I would tell you, I don't have a lot of optimism at the state level. The state, for whatever reasons, has not seen it as a wise investment to significantly increase the amount of funding for public transportation statewide. I don't think you're going to see it there. We've tried to lobby and haven't had much success. The other thing I would point to, again, Mayor Hamilton, just before the pandemic began, had talked about some new funds that would support climate change strategies. And one of those could be investment of local funds in Bloomington Transit, and would encourage you to consider that as one of the mechanisms to help provide additional resources for transit so that we can grow service and expand service and provide an alternative to the automobile.
Thank you. And follow up on that, because like right now you are having a driver shortage. So you have the funding to pay the drivers that you need. But what you're saying is there's of course no extra capital money for buses and a larger plant expansion or a second plant.
Well, there are federal grants, competitive grants out there, and we've been very successful in tapping those grants. And the hope is that those federal programs will continue. We have heard that there will be a significantly expanded electric vehicle fund as part of the infrastructure bill. So we very much look forward to going for those funds. We think there will also be some funds available for infrastructure. And so by that, I mean, in order to support a much larger electric bus fleet, for example, we're going to have to invest a sizable amount of money into the electrical infrastructure here, because we know we don't have it. And we're probably talking several $1 million in order to support a much larger fleet of electric vehicles. Hopefully I answered your question, sir.
You did. Thank you.
Council President Sims.
Thank you. Mr. May, you just discussed some of the barriers to expanding service. And thank you for sharing that. But it dawned on me that probably the most immediate and urgent barrier having to do with we're not allowed to operate outside of city boundaries. Would you agree with that? So regardless of what other resources we have, if there is no expansion, then there is no, if there is no broadening of the boundaries, there is no expansion.
Yeah, that would require council approval there. When Bloomington Transit was created as a public transit corporation in 1982, one of the conditions that council set was that our service area or our operational boundaries would be the city boundaries. I think the phrase in the ordinance was they would be coterminous with the city boundaries there. So that's something that council potentially could change, but I'm guessing council would probably want to see an outside source of funding if we were to provide service outside of the city in order to support that new service there.
Okay, thank you very much. And you mentioned the OEM electric batteries. I think I have that term correct. And I was wondering, how much do those units cost, and what life do you expect from new batteries, new OEM electric batteries?
Yeah, the bus manufacturer warrants the batteries on new buses for 6 years. And after that, we will have to replace them at our own expense. So again, we've got a 6-year warranty. We do have some experience with this, having a number of hybrid buses in our fleet. We currently have 8 hybrid buses. About 20% of our fleet are hybrids there. And of those 8 buses, and some of them date back as much as 15 years, we've only had to replace 1 set of batteries so far, and at the cost of about $50,000 for a new set of batteries on one of those hybrid buses. So we know it's going to be expensive, but we've had some experience with it, and it's been a relatively good track record with batteries on hybrid buses. And we think battery electric bus technology is going to improve and is going to get better as time goes on and as the technology improves. And I really think we're all going to probably be driving electric vehicles sometime in the next decade or so. That seems to be where vehicle technology is going.
Thank you. And do you anticipate if we ever get to more fully electric operation or hybrid operations, the expense of the fuel that we use now, fossil fuels and those other things, is that going to be enough to offset these new?
Yeah, it
batteries
remains
and-
to be seen. From what we understand from the electric bus manufacturers, we should see considerable savings in fuel. The electricity that is used to power the buses supposedly will be much less than the liquid fuels that we have been using. But beyond that, electric bus manufacturers are telling us we can anticipate seeing significant savings in maintenance costs on these vehicles. They have fewer moving parts. So again, the jury is still out on this. We want to get some experience with it. We've got our first 2 vehicles that have been in operation for about a month now. And we'll soon have a better understanding of what the future holds on that.
Thank you, Mr. May. I've exceeded my time with apologies to the chair. Sorry about that, but thank you for answering.
Yes, I asked my colleagues to keep an eye on that time and keep, if the time's almost up, please save your question for the next round. Are there any other questions for Mr. May? So I've gone second round questions. So I have one before I get back to Councilmember Rollo. My question has to do with the impacts of climate change and the flooding that we saw in June. And Mr. May, you mentioned, of course, that Clear Creek is right there by the transit facility. Did you have flooding at that time? And what also, as far as the operation of buses in a major flooding event, what impacts can you predict?
Yeah, we did have, in fact, in my 23 years, it's the first significant flooding that we had from that Clear Creek there. And we, in a very short period of time from about that Friday night, from about 10:45 to midnight, when the heavy rains occurred there, that creek did overflow its banks. And the water did come up into our parking lot there. And we had a number of buses that were inundated, and we got a few inches of water through the front door of some of those vehicles. We were fortunate that it wasn't worse than it was. It could have been pretty bad. But fortunately, as quickly as the flooding came, it also very quickly dissipated. In a period of about 90 minutes, it was completely gone, and not a drop was left on the site there. So it drove home the importance of us being better prepared in terms of flood mitigation efforts and having plans in place to move as many vehicles as quickly as we can to higher ground.
And as far as operating buses during a storm event, do you have a procedure for stopping the buses, or how do you handle those kind of situations?
Yeah, we tell drivers that you should not drive through areas where the water is deep enough that it will touch the body of the vehicle there. And you need to simply stay away from those because it can cause damage to the vehicles, and more importantly, it could be a hazard or a safety issue there. Fortunately, we didn't have too much of that when the flooding occurred. It occurred late on a Friday night. Many of our buses were already in. But over the years, we have had issues, especially down on Kirkwood, where there's been some rather serious flooding, and we've had to detour vehicles on very short notice to avoid that flooding.
Thank you. Councilmember Rollo, did you have another question?
I did, and this one's really kind of beyond the scope of your charge, Director May, but I dream of someday that we'd have an integrated public transportation system where you could get on a bus like one does in Europe, and you could take it anywhere. You could take it to a rail line, and you could go to Chicago, or you could go to Louisville, or you could, visit other cities, and you could return without having to do it on a private transportation. So Amtrak, it turns out, is establishing new rail corridors, and unfortunately, we're not on it. You may be aware of it, but there's a route that goes from Chicago to Indianapolis down to Louisville, and it goes to Columbus. And I just I know this is really far beyond your scope, but you're an advocate for public transportation. I know you're aware of these things, your board is. Is there any talk locally of having some kind of rail spur or some kind of service that would connect us to such a corridor where Bloomington could be tied in?
I've heard nothing, no discussion about that. I would concur with your assessment that it would be great to have a much better passenger rail network in our country. Amtrak, of course, is publicly funded, and just like us, they're struggling for resources. But I am encouraged from what I'm hearing in the new infrastructure bill that there could be significant additional funding for Amtrak, which would help them broaden their passenger rail network across the country. But again, I've heard no discussion about Bloomington being on the map for a potential rail spur or rail line in any time in the immediate future.
Okay, thanks for letting us know. It's unlikely to happen unless we advocate for it, and I don't know who to contact right now about it. So if you do know, let us know, please. Thank you.
All right, any final questions for Mr. May before we go to the public? All right, seeing none. If any member of the public would like to comment on the budget proposal for Bloomington Transportation Company, Bloomington Transit, you can use the raise hand function in Zoom, or you can type into the chat to the meeting host. And Ms. Lacey is helping us out tonight. Who do we have?
It looks like Greg Alexander, who should be able to unmute.
Thank you. My name is Greg Alexander. I want to say Bloomington Transit is awesome. I love it. If you ride it, you'll see a good number of poor people and a lot of students. I don't know about specifically right now, but in general, you will. For middle class people, it's simply not as compelling. The poor frequency really could stand to be improved, but a larger problem is that cars and parking are so heavily subsidized. And so people, they have a choice to make, and we're funding one of those choices very, very heavily. Another big problem is missing sidewalks or unmaintained sidewalks. You know, if you miss the bus, or it's not running on the weekend, or you're stuck late somewhere past bus service, you're going to be walking home and you're going to find out that there's not sidewalks on big major roads. You're going to be walking in the street on big major roads, and you will say to yourself, never again, and you'll never ride the bus again. This is a very common experience among young professionals that live here. And on top of that, when you got off the bus, it's not going to be directly in front of your house. You're going to be walking that last 3 blocks to your house without sidewalks every day, in the best case. The driver shortage is a really severe crisis. I'm real worried about it when student ridership picks back up, but I'm optimistic they'll be able to pay the drivers enough to solve that problem. I wanted to draw attention to a contrast. Parking garages have a similar pattern of reduced demand because of coronavirus, and they were oversized even compared to the estimated demand when they were designed. So there's no way we're going to bring in enough revenue for those. But because those bonds are backed by the TIF district, if I understand correctly, automatically the taxes on the property owners in that TIF district are going to go up automatically if there's not enough demand for the parking. And I just want to remind you all that at least one of you campaigned explicitly on increased funding for Bloomington Transit. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Do we have any other members of the public who would like to make a comment on the Bloomington Transit budget? You can use the raise hand function in Zoom or type a message to the meeting host in the chat function.
I do not see any additional raised hands, and I do not have any messages in the chat.
All right, thank you, Ms. Lacey. Then I think we can come back to council members for final comments and debate on the Bloomington Transit budget. Councilmember Rollo.
Well, I'll support this budget. I think it's always a pleasure to hear from Director May, and even under the worst times, such as the pandemic. But I think that it was clear that that Bloomington Transit adapted as well as it could to it, and I look forward to now higher riderships. I would like to continue to explore our contribution in some form to allow free ridership. I think that that would be a way in which we really expand the service and prevent any obstacles for people using it. I think that we need to explore a local income tax again to have the resources that we need for the material investment in Bloomington Transit as it expands, and I think it should expand. And I just want to say, I think we entered a golden age of Bloomington Transit under Lou May's direction, and it's amazing to see how far we've come. I remember just continually being amazed every year that the ridership was just going up, progressing up every year, and more was being done. So thank you, Director May, and we'll miss you.
Thank you.
Any other council member comments? Yes, Councilmember Scambaluri.
Yes, thank you. I'll certainly be supporting this budget, but I ran out of time before I could offer my thanks as well. As one of the newer council members, I know I have peppered you with questions over the last year and a half, and you have been endlessly patient, and I am grateful for that. So best wishes as you go forward, and thank you again for all you've done.
Councilmember Volin. You are muted.
Yes, I just noticed that. I wanted to respond to a couple of points raised, I think both by Councilmember Rallo. A number of years ago, I had reason to contact the Indiana Railroad to inquire about the one remaining spur that runs through town that connects us to Indianapolis in a circuitous way through Franklin. And the number one issue with providing passenger rail service on that rail, on that line, is that the tracks need to be upgraded, that they're really only rated for 40 miles an hour. And that conceivably would be something that the potential rider would find discouraging. It would take maybe an hour and a half to get to Indianapolis via train, and it would take millions to upgrade that line. So that's an unfortunate hurdle we have to overcome, as surely as the 10th Street underpass that Mr. May has been the bane of Mr. May's existence for his career. The second thing is I want apartment complex opening up on North Walnut is only happening because it was negotiated in the PUD, but we all but removed PUDs from our new zoning ordinance. I mean, there's a reason why we removed it. It was effectively a kind of elaborate spot zoning. It was a kind of arbitrariness. But one of the huge disadvantages of it was that we can no longer persuade a department complex to do something as the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councilmember Flaherty.
Yes, just a brief one to say apologies to Mr. May for missing your presentation. I had a conflict and couldn't step on the meeting until about 6:45 this evening. So I'm going to abstain tonight just because I would like to review the presentation as well and hear more before deciding one way or the other. But echoing the comments of others, thank you very much for your service. I've very much enjoyed our interactions over the last few years. So thank you.
Councilmember Rosenbarger.
Thank you. I plan to abstain tonight just because I want to learn a little more. I would also like to say, Director May, it has been a pure joy working with you for these almost 2 years. While I started asking you a lot of questions, I think, when I was running for office. So thank you for agreeing to meet a lot and teaching me so much about transit. I want to dig a little deeper, I think, with just some points that you made about like maybe potentially a desire for investment of local funds. I want to check that out a little bit. I think you have done an exceptional job at providing a wonderful service with the amount of funding you've had over the years, just really stretching every dollar. And I think that is amazing. Just looking at the 4.2 budget increase this year that you're asking for, I mean, in my mind, transit is so very important. And I think that's just a drop in the bucket of what we need. So, and I know we probably need larger items like potentially like TIF or other kind of capital investments. So it might not come from a city budget, but I want to use this opportunity definitely to start brainstorming and working on that. So I'm going to abstain again tonight, and thank you so much.
All right, any other final comments? Well, then I'll take an opportunity to add my thanks to Mr. May for his endless patience and his expertise and his way of explaining things very clearly that I have grown to appreciate very much over the years. And I wish you all the best in retirement. And you've done an excellent job leading our public transportation system, a very excellent system for many years. So I think we're ready for a due pass recommendation. If somebody would like to make a motion.
So moved.
Second.
All right, and I'll just call the names as I see them on my screen. Councilmember Scambaluri,
Yes.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Rollo,
Yes.
Councilmember Sims,
Yes.
Councilmember Flaherty,
Abstain.
Councilmember Sandberg,
Yes.
Councilmember Boland,
Yes.
Councilmember Rosenbarger,
Abstain.
and I will vote yes. So that passes with the due pass recommendation of 702.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. All right, now we are moving onward to the City of Bloomington Utilities Department. And I believe we have Mr. Vic Kelson, Director of Utilities, with us this evening. So whenever you're ready.
Okay, good evening. I'm working on finding my presentation here.
Okay.
Got
Ms.
too many
Lacey,
windows open at once.
Ms. Lacey, how much time do we have for this utilities presentation?
25 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Okay. Here we go. Good evening, Council. I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity to present our 2022 budget for City of Bloomington Utilities, or CBU as we call it. I'd like to call out several members of our staff who are with us tonight. Laura Pettit, our Assistant Director for Finance, Brandon Prince, our Assistant Director for Transmission and Distribution, Brad Schrader, our Assistant Director for Engineering, and James Hall, our Assistant Director for Environmental Programs. Tom Axum, our Assistant Director for Operations, is on PTO today, so he's not calling in. We also, I noticed, have a few of our other staff members lurking and watching, and I'd like to take just a moment to thank all of the CBU staff that have been coming to work every day through the pandemic. The majority of our staff never gets to work from home. They're out there in the plants, or they're out there fixing water main breaks or whatnot. And they've done a tremendous job of working together through the pandemic. And I think we all owe them a debt of gratitude. City of Bloomington Utilities exists to provide safe and sustainable water, wastewater, and stormwater services in an economical manner, promoting prosperity and quality of life in our community. We have 169 full-time equivalent employees today. We also have 12 vacancies right now. We serve 3 utilities through 6 interconnected divisions. We have our waterworks, has around 25,000 active accounts. Monroe Water Treatment Plant, 400 plus miles of water mains and over 3,000 fire hydrants. Our sewer work serves 22,500 some odd service connections. We have 2 treatment plants, 321 miles of collection mains, and over 8,000 manholes. And our stormwater utility provides 101 miles of pipe and ditches and nearly 6,000 storm inlets. Just a little background for 2022, our major initiatives are increased capacity for wastewater treatment, primarily at the Dillman site. Drinking water quality improvements are always on the agenda for CVU. Replacing aging water mains, water infrastructure is a high priority for us right now. Making additional improvements to our stormwater system, modernizing processes throughout the organization, and expanding our climate action programs. The 2022 budget is not a large diversion from the 2021 budget. 2021 was a year when we started a lot of big things. 2022 is going to be the year we finish a lot of those big things. So you'll see that as a theme going through tonight. Since 2019, we've organized our budget goals based on 10 activity areas that are described in the Effective Utility Management Framework provided by the American Water Works Association, US EPA, and a host of other utilities organizations. These 10 product categories are shown here. These or activity areas are all shown here. We provide our budget goals in terms of all of these categories. Tonight for 2021, I want to just touch on a few of our budget goals. All the budget goals that we had in our 2021 budget are in the hard copy of the presentation that you received as a PDF today. In the interest of brevity, I decided to just go with a few summary slides. So in the waterworks, we're installing 10 automatic flushing hydrants in specific areas of town. These allow us to take old water out of places where there's a dead end in a water main. This improves water quality in the distribution system, and these hydrants can be operated from the water plant. We don't have to send someone out to open a hydrant. In the sewer works, we will continue. We've been underway since late last year on the Dillman Road wastewater treatment plant improvements. These are modernization and eventually capacity upgrades to that plant. Also in the sewer works, we are conducting a local limit study for the Blucher Pool wastewater plant sewer shed. So this is all spurred on by the arrival of the new hospital. There's now enough industrial flow in that basin that we have to have an industrial pretreatment program. So we're working on that right now. In the stormwater utility, we are nearly complete with the development of the stormwater master plan. We have also, through 2021, in 2021, 2022, we've been providing in-kind sampling and laboratory support for the sampling and gauging station that was installed as part of the Section 319 grant efforts for the Friends of Lake Monroe. We also provide them with over $20,000 in in-kind services for sample analysis each year. CVU will also be providing technical assistance as needed by the Lake Monroe Water Fund Steering Committee. The Water Fund is now spinning up, and we've been working with them for several years. Specifically, goals related to sustainability. The Dillman Road upgrades are a big deal. Dillman Road wastewater plant is the largest electricity consumer in Monroe County. And we anticipate that we'll probably save about 15% of the electrical usage that we use for aeration at that plant, which is a huge demand relative to other demands in the county. So that's a big deal for us. Advanced metering infrastructure, we completed that in 2020, and we're really seeing the benefits of it this year. As we modernize our operations, but also we've seen a significant reduction, as you might guess, in the amount of fuel that's being used by the vehicles that serve the meter services operations. Our solar panel implementations are fully operational now and are providing a significant amount of power at several of our facilities. And we've begun spending money from the Green Stormwater Infrastructure program. We're investing $150,000 on the 7-line project for a number of green infrastructure improvements such as rain gardens and so forth. So we're happy to have been able to upgrade the quality of the 7-line by adding green infrastructure to the original designs. We do spend a lot of time thinking about equity, not just in lots of different ways. First of all, in 2021, we've increased our customer assistance program funding from $45,000 to $50,000. Last year in 2020, during the pandemic, we did not use up all of the money, although we used a large fraction of it last year. This year, demand for the customer assistance program is actually down quite a bit compared to last year. In the stormwater utility, we are dedicating $75,000 to the residential stormwater grant program. Those awards are still in process right now. People are getting started on their projects. And then in terms of equity, another term of equity that we don't think about is making sure that each of our customer categories is paying what it really costs to provide their service for water. We did this for sewer a couple of years ago. For water, we're in the process of it right now. And this adjusts, as you all know, when we brought the case before you, we're trying to restructure our rates in a way to make sure that each customer is paying the cost, each customer class is paying the cost of providing the service that that class uses. We also have a concern about generational equity, and that is making sure that as we do water main replacement, we don't want a bond for water main replacement because it's a 100-year project. We'll all be paying for it forever. So we want to make sure that we're not pushing that forward too far with debt funding. For 2022, I'm only going to touch on some goals in the 5 largest categories in the interest of time. The first category is product quality. This, in short, this activity area is to produce fit for purpose drinking water, treated wastewater effluent, stormwater discharge, and the other recovered items such as energy or nutrients or biosolids. This is all has to be done within the regulatory frameworks that we operate under. In the waterworks, we've got some specific goals to operate the Monroe treatment plant and all of the distribution system 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, without any violations of operating permits. We've been working hard for 5 years now on the maintenance of lower levels of disinfection byproducts and other contaminants. We will continue to achieve the 50 parts per billion average on total trihalomethanes and 40 parts per billion or less for haloacetic acids. These are about 2/3 of the EPA limits. And then in 2022, we continue our installation of auto flush hydrants with 5 more of them in 2022. The new ones are a little fancier than the old ones because they're designed to actually discharge directly into stormwater infrastructure rather than simply being dumped into a ditch as the illustration you see here. In the sewer works, again, we'll operate both of our plants 24 hours a day, 365 days a year without violations of the permits. We hope to complete the analysis in 2021 for the Blucher Pool Basin industrial pretreatment program. What we would then do is work with EPA in 2022 to develop amendments to the sewer use ordinance and then bring those to council hopefully next year, although EPA sometimes takes quite a while to get through that process. In the stormwater utility, we'll begin implementing the stormwater master plan that is being developed this year. This would ultimately require that we'll request ordinance changes to marry that program with the UDO and to publish the stormwater quality manual for the city. Operational optimization is the second budget goal. We're trying to automate processes and make better data-driven decisions. All the utilities will be involved in these budget goals. We're expecting to deploy at least 3 new analytical tools or dashboard applications that will be used inside CDU to make better, more efficient decisions. We will complete the execution of the asset management program for our 3 treatment plants by the end of the year. This year in 2021, we are completing the implementation of the asset management for the linear infrastructure, all the pipes and pumps and inlets and fire hydrants and so forth. We'll complete the deployment and implementation of the cloud and mobile tracking software for our sewage waste haulers. This is all part of the preferred pumper program. And we'll implement SCADA monitoring of pumps, flow rates, disinfectant levels, and the other operating parameters in at least one of our tanks and booster stations. Employee and leadership development is recruiting, developing, and retaining a workforce that's competent, motivated, adaptive, and safety-centered. We will continue, as the mayor has requested, to invest at least 1.5% of our personnel budget in each division for professional training. We work very hard to make sure that all the people who need licenses can keep those up to date. We'll ensure that every work site has at least one team member who's CPR certified, and we will continue our efforts to train our senior leadership in value stream mapping and other Lean and Six Sigma methodologies to improve our operating processes. Financial viability is planning for the full life cycle cost of our operations and the value of our water resources. All utilities are involved in this. We purchased the CityWorks enterprise management software in 2020. We're deploying it in 2021 for the linear infrastructure, and then, as I said, the plants in 2022. So one of the ultimate goals of asset management is to know what the cost of your the life cycle cost of your equipment, and to allow you to make better plans for equipment replacement and maintenance and so forth. We will be implementing CityWorks driven centralized work order and inventory systems through the plants to streamline work order processing and so forth there. Also, in the waterworks, when the rate case is over, we will implement the new rates within 60 days of final approval. That depends upon final IURC approval of the rate case. We'll also be conducting a sewer works rate review to bring to council next year, hopefully in the third quarter of 2022. And similarly, we'll be reviewing the stormwater fee with an eye towards some additional infrastructure spending there as well in the third quarter of 2022. And then finally, infrastructure strategy and performance is maintaining and enhancing the conditions of our assets at the lowest possible life cycle cost and acceptable risk. In the waterworks, a lot of this category is dedicated to water main replacement. Next year, we expect to spend about $2 million and replace up to 2.5 miles of pipe. This is based on the assumption that we will get the timely approval of our rate case and get it implemented in time. We also, thank you so much to council for your approval of the appropriation for the lead service line inventory last week. We plan to complete that by the end of the third quarter next year. And then we have another between $3 and $4.4 million of capital projects at the Monroe plant and elsewhere that we would be hoping to complete next year. This includes coating and adding a mixing system to the east tank, belt filter press at the Monroe plant, and replacement of filter media at the Monroe plant. Again, these all depend on timely approval of the rate case. In the sewer works, we'll be completing the modernization and capacity improvement projects that we're doing at Dillman. This is overall about $23 million. And we, again, anticipate a significant reduction in electrical consumption for aeration. We'll also be lining between 5 and 6 miles of sewer pipe and doing other improvements with manholes and infrastructure at a budget cost of about $700,000 to $800,000. The stormwater utility, we plan to deploy about $100,000 to the residential stormwater grants program. This year, the big change that we want to make is we've discovered that some customers, some residents of the city find it difficult to understand exactly how to propose a project or how to design a project. We expect to contract with an engineering organization to be able to provide assistance with designs to level the playing field between the people who are requesting these grants. This has been a technical issue for some of our applicants that we want to try and make this work more effectively, especially in underserved portions of the community. And we'll complete the Hidden River Pathway project, which is going to cost about $13.2 million overall. So just looking at some budget highlights, in 2020, we endured a reduction of water revenue of about 7%. We had a similar reduction in revenue for sewer because they're tied together pretty closely. In 2021, we're experiencing about a 2% increase over what we saw in 2020. We're anticipating another, did I skip a slide? There's the revenue budgets, I'm sorry. A similar increase of maybe 2.5 or 2.7% in water in 2022. Sewer is very closely connected with water, and stormwater fee increases much more slowly. Just a quick word about how we do budgets. CBU budgets every dollar of anticipated revenue for each of the 3 utilities. We specifically call out numbers for the personnel, supplies, other services, and the water sinking fund, that's debt service on large projects. The remainder of the money is called ENR or other services. That's the money we have left over for doing capital maintenance and other kinds of projects. And you see as a rate cycle proceeds, you tend to have less and less ENR. And we're getting pretty low on it in the waterworks. So next year, we're anticipating essentially the same budget as this year with a slight increase to ENR because we spent so little in 2021. Significant changes in the waterworks are just simply what you saw a moment ago, mostly level or just dealing with inflation. In the sewer works, we see a lot of the same thing. We're budgeting basically the same in 2022 as we did in 2021, plus adjusting for inflation. And we're seeing the ENR in the sewer works is going down significantly. And a lot of that is because some of that money is actually going towards the large project as well. At the Dillman project, I should say. Again, things are more or less just growing by inflation in the sewer works, and ENR is just adjusted according to whatever dollars are left from the other categories. And then finally, in the stormwater utility, we see a similar pattern as with the other utilities. It's more or less inflationary growth. The big change in 21 over 20 was the storm sinking fund. That's the bond for the Hidden River Pathway project. We do plan to budget $400,000 for our green infrastructure program again in 2022. Similarly, as the other utilities, the stormwater utility is mostly growing with inflation. So our budget request reflects the increases that align with all of our stated goals, continuous improvement in water quality and process efficiencies in the organization, water main replacement, improvements to the stormwater system, and climate action program expansion and planning for future demand in the sewer utility. Thanks so much for considering our budget and the opportunity to present tonight, and I'm happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kelson. You could unshare your screen. We can see more council members. Thank you very much. And Councilmember Rollo, start you with the first question from you.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Kelson. I guess I'll begin with an annexation question. If we were to proceed with annexation as the proposed areas, I'm wondering about sewer capacity and whether we will have adequate sewer capacity when we start hooking on, sewers for residents in those areas.
Annexation is really doesn't really affect the process of adding sewer very much. Right now, the way it works is basically we sell the service. You have to buy the infrastructure to get it and then pay to connect to it. So that process won't change. We expect that sewer growth will continue roughly at the pace it's been growing in recent years, with one exception, and that is that right now we have this area A and area B. If you want to expand outside of our current service area and you're in area B, you have an extra step. You have to go to the utility service board to get permission to do that extension. So sewer extensions work exactly the same after annexation as they do before annexation.
Okay, just to be clear, so I was talking about sort of where it goes. I mean, will Dillman and Blucher Pool be up to an increase in essentially sewage that would be directed there?
Yes, and yes, I was just about to get there.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I wasn't filibustering, I promise. The project we're doing right now at Dillman ultimately gets us most of the way to being able to getting the plant to a 20 million gallon per day capacity. That project isn't doing anything with the digesters. We set that aside as we've been exploring this waste to energy concept. So when we finish the current project, we'll be coming back with another project to finish digesters, and that will get the plant to 20 million gallons per day of capacity. Blucher Pool similarly has sufficient capacity for the growth we anticipate to the north.
I see. Looks like we got a few seconds. Could I just ask you, you had a slide that was 2022 budget goals, employee leadership development, and it had a graph of incidents or accidents. I think the axis said accidents, the subtitle was incidents. Are those personal injuries that you were referring to?
Those are,
these? Go ahead.
Those are incidents related to all of our operations. So some of those are fender benders, some of those are cases, those kinds of things. They're not injuries.
Okay. All right. I'll come back to other questions later. Thanks.
Councilmember Scavallari.
Thank you. I have a couple COVID related questions too, and thank you for the presentation. I am always in awe of all the moving parts you have to keep track of. We've talked several times in recent months about the financial hardship that COVID has created for a lot of individuals and families. Are there patterns we should be aware of that you've seen in bill paying or bill non-payment? Is there anything you could share with us on that?
Last year, we saw that we had an increase in the number of customers who were in arrears. That was also reflected in the increased use of the customer assistance program. We really aren't seeing that as much this year. It's more or less normal this year.
Okay, good. Do you see any reason it wouldn't continue that way, or do you think we've truly turned the corner on that?
I think on that particular aspect, we have pretty much turned the corner, unless we go back into full lockdown again.
Okay, let's hope not. One of the things we talked about too, I think you might have just answered this question, but we talked about supply chain disruptions last year that concerned a lot of utilities, not just us, in terms of the chemicals we need to purify our water and so forth. May I assume that we are through those as well? And
actually, not really. And some of the places you wouldn't expect it. Our water main replacement is dependent on our ability to get that pipe. The supply of pipe has been reduced, and it's coming a lot slower than it had been. Also, just recently, we've run into longer delivery times for things like chlorine for the disinfection of the water plant. So we are seeing some some delays and those kinds of things.
Okay. Anything that will cause a significant delay in our water main replacement or any?
Not at this point, no.
Okay, sounds good. I have a couple other questions, but I'll hold them till next round. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions for Mr. Kelson? Councilmember Smith.
Thank you. Mr. Kelson, thanks for all you do. You do a great job. Really appreciate it. I'm really happy that you're doing a lead-based pipe kind of identification. The question I wanted to ask is, do you test the water in Bloomington for lead?
Overall, what we do is we do two things. At the water plant, we do we deliver the water at a pH that makes sure that we're not corrosive to metals in the distribution system. So it's actually tending to lay down scale. Customers that have lead pipes or fear that they may have lead pipes or have lead in their homes, we'll test them for free. So all a customer needs to do is call, and we'll get samples and then test those samples for lead.
Well, thank you. You anticipated my second question because of all the publicity that happened over the last few years. I was going to ask you if somebody has a concern, so they can just call utilities department and ask for their water to be tested.
They can.
Thank you very much.
It's free of charge.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kelson.
Can I add
Sam.
one more
Yes.
little point on that? And we also do have an ongoing testing program that's covered by the lead and copper rule from EPA. So we are actually constantly monitoring a number of locations in the system, a number of homes. So we do have volunteers who assist us with the lead and copper monitoring program as well.
Thank you.
Councilmember Sandberg.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Kelson. I appreciated our phone conversation today. And while we are talking about water and testing, let's go to the mother source, Lake Monroe, and talk to us a little bit about the, let's see, what the Monroe County Water Fund and how that interacts with Friends of Monroe County, or does it? I think the public would appreciate a description of that.
Certainly. Shortly after I started working at CBU in 2016, we began working with a group of folks who are wanting to establish a water fund. And a water fund is an umbrella organization created of stakeholders that is dedicated to recruiting donations for monies that can be used for watershed restoration projects or source water protection, those kinds of things. Specifically, Jane Martin, who is pretty well known to all of us in city government, was involved in that. The Nature Conservancy, Conservation Law Center at IU, CBU, and lots of other organizations. Friends of Lake Monroe has been involved in all of that. Monroe County Corps of Engineers and the DNR. So it's been pretty broad. Over the last 4 or 5 years, we've been working to establish how that water fund would work. As we got to the end of that process, I really thought that it's best that the utility stays out of the business of choosing the people who are actually doing that work, because we're going to contribute to that work. So we want to leave the water fund to do that kind of activity, because ultimately these kinds of things have to have ongoing sustained funding, and they're connecting up with the Chamber of Commerce and the forestry folks and the farms and the neighboring counties and so forth. So it's a much broader participation through the water fund than if we were just simply giving donations to specific researchers. So that's the way that we've been going. I stepped aside from working on that, but the city's representative on the board for the water fund is Alex Crowley. So he's the one who works directly with the board. So that's what it is. It's an umbrella funding organization that can give grants to anybody who's doing work in the watershed.
Great, thank you.
I'd like to follow up on that question and ask you, Mr. Kelson, about specifically the Friends of Lake Monroe and their 319 grant application that they would like to put in this coming year. And they have asked the city for about $68,000 in matching funds. They've asked the equal amount from the county. Where does that request stand with the city?
The request, we really haven't received a formal request at CBU, but our intention would be that that's the kind of thing that we would hope the water fund would be able to do. At this point, I'm not sure what the request is to do precisely, because we haven't seen the reports from the first phase. So I can't really judge the proposal of a second phase until I see what came out of the first phase. And so at this point, we really haven't been looking at it in detail, anticipate that those kinds of things could be funded through the water fund.
So does the city pay anything into the water fund?
Yes. Yes, we've dedicated monies to the water fund. Specifically, we've budgeted a grant to them to help them spin up the fundraising operations.
So how much does the city contribute to the water fund?
Well, at this point, I think we've committed, I think, $35,000 for 2022. That could be reviewed and revisited as we move forward and no more.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'll follow up with you specifically about the Friends of Lake Monroe request and make sure you received what I believe all the council members received, and see how we can.
Well,
I've
received a couple of things over time, and we've discussed it, but it's not something we're including in our budget at this point.
Okay. Other questions, Councilmember Flaherty?
Sure. Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Kelson. Like my colleagues, I'm always impressed by all the work your department does. And I very much appreciate the systems level analysis you all bring to everything, thinking about life cycles and replacement. Kind of following on that theme in the context of stormwater and stormwater management, I know our city climate action plan, for instance, has a goal asking or that we measure or identify anticipated volume requirements for meeting anticipated storm needs and identifying management systems that are capable, where we are and are not capable of meeting those projected needs. And kind of wanted to ask a bit more details. Is that something the stormwater management plan is tasked with identifying? And what is your general sense in terms of the future 10, 20, 30 years on, knowing that the intensity and frequency of rain events in our area is going to increase in certain times of the year? How are we positioned in terms of mitigating that?
I'd love to answer this question. I've just been told my internet connection is unstable, so if I break up, I'll be right back. Recently, we had a big flood downtown. We all know about this down on Kirkwood. That's a significant low place down there. It is ultimately served by the Hidden River project that we're working on right now. When that occurred, we're obviously, we still have another piece of that Hidden River project, and that's the inlet to it that actually would be near Sample Gate, between Sample Gates and Dunn Meadow. And so that would still have to be completed when we finish the current project. That will be, that's a project that we are including in the capital improvement plan for the stormwater utility proposal next year. But I'm by nature, my training is I'm an environmental modeler and a hydrological modeler. And we've been talking with the Corps of Engineers and some others about the prospect of developing a computational model of that watershed. It's a big watershed. It's got most of the IU campus. It goes up the hill up to 11th Street north of the area that was affected, and so forth. So We've reached out to the Corps of Engineers. They may be able to help with a partially funded program to do that kind of modeling. So we could look at these sort of freakishly large storms. I mean, the one that caused that flood, as Lou May mentioned, the water arrived very quickly and it left very quickly. And that also happened down on Kirkwood. And so we really don't have any modeling support or any tools right now for looking at that particular basin and making sure that we have whatever additional infrastructure we might need. So this is our first time to look into trying to do some computational modeling to make sense of large storm events. I think that's probably an archetype for how we're going to proceed on into the future. We're going to have to find troubled basins, especially the ones that are most prone to these flash flooding incidents during large storm events, and we'll be working that way.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Other questions for Mr. Kelson? I'll go with Councilmember Sims since we're still in the first round of questions.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Kelson. I've had the pleasure of being around with utilities and boards and watching you operate since you became the director. And I am liking the upward trend of how operations is going in many areas. Obviously, as you know, there's areas to be improved. But when looking at the employee and leadership development portion, and you say to invest at least 1.5% of CBU personnel budget for training and different areas of training. I specifically want to ask you in regards to the city's upcoming anti-racist training program. And where is CBU fit in there, and how do you envision that in helping your department and moving through the ranks?
We're actually in the process of organizing that in September at CBU. So next month is when we anticipate we'll be pulling all that together. All of our divisions will be involved. Our senior leadership has been through some training, but we'll be continuing to train the entire organization, and we'll be doing a lot of that work in the next month or two. So one of the challenges for us is we're big enough that we have to find large rooms to have meetings in. Because of COVID, we need a lot of spacing. Hopefully the boardroom will be, we're in the process of doing boardroom improvements, which I think will make it a lot easier to make the training work effectively.
Okay, thank you. I trust your creativity in getting that done and finding your space needs. To piggyback a little bit on the Friends of Lake Monroe and our watershed issues, over the years, and we've had relationships with them and different leadership and that sort of thing. And it seems to me, in my experience sitting on the board, that we've had some great years of having great relationships and some that not so great, depending on one's viewpoint. I guess, where are we now? Or how do you feel from a relationship standpoint? Not to put you on the spot, but I know it's been up and down and up and down. And I'd like to see that.
Specifically, we've been working. We've been assisting with the 319 process quite a lot. Last year we spent about $22,000. Well, what we did was we provided them with services that would have cost them $22,000 in kind services. We're heading towards doing that again this year. When the new gauge was installed over in Kurtz, Indiana, on the South Fork of Salt Creek, the original plan was that the Friends would be doing regular monthly samples, but that they'd also be doing sampling after major storm events. It turned out that they just couldn't make that work with the budget that they had. And what ended up happening is that people from our environmental group are going out and doing that sampling. And I've actually gone out there too. It's kind of a nice drive over there. So we are helping with all of these kinds of things.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'm out of time.
Sorry.
Thank you. I was going to say I'm out of time, and I may follow up with the next round. Thank you very much.
Are there any other first round questions for Mr. Kelson? All right, seeing none, Councilmember Rallo, you have another question?
Yeah, I do. Maybe a couple more, but this one has to do with the Hidden River project. Director Kelson, I wondered if it's on budget and time schedule, and am I correct? It was the funding was fee-based. We included it in our fee increase. Is that correct?
We bonded for that project based on the stormwater fee increase of 2019. The project was scheduled for, was planned as a 2-year project. When our contractors started working on it, they thought that they could finish it far sooner than that, but we've hit a snag. And that is that at 3rd and Lincoln, there's the building at 3rd and Lincoln that was the Senage Salon building there. That used to be a dry cleaners, as it was when I got to Bloomington in 1990. And dry cleaner locations oftentimes have soil contamination nearby, and contaminated soils were encountered at that location when some of the early work on this project was being done. So we've completed an assessment of the extent of the contaminated soil and what needs to be moved. We have to move it one container load at a time and have those containers tested. And those tests take a week or 2 to get back before we can ultimately dispose of the soil. So right now we can do them in batches. We have, I think, 48 or 49 roll-off containers that are parked down at the Winston Thomas site as we're going through this process. So once that's done, we'll be able to get rolling again. We anticipate getting into 3rd Street in November. We will close 1 lane at a time as we go across.
So does that represent a significant increase on the 13 million that was anticipated for the project?
It looks like it's going to be $700,000 or $800,000 by the time we get done. We're fairly confident that we'll be able to recover part of it from various insurers that have been covering both the source of the pollution and the city itself over time. So we're cautiously optimistic that we can get some of that money back.
I see. Okay, with 40 seconds remaining, could you update us on the detention pond in Deer Park? Is that happening soon? Is it on its way?
It's on its way. It's been through, it went through the plan review process, planning department. There were some concerns about the proximity of rain gardens and right-of-way issues, but I believe those are all sorted out, and we're getting ready to put it out for bid.
Okay, so it's coming soon.
Coming soon.
Great, thank you.
Are there other questions? Councilmember Scamillari?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Kelson, I'm sorry, could I trouble you to put your slides back up, and in particular the budget highlights for either waterworks or sewer works, one of those. Sorry.
You may get into questions I don't know the answer to, but fortunately Laura's here. Laura, be ready. Yeah. Okay.
Great, thank you. So if I understood you correctly, other services, ENR, that number, correct me if I'm misunderstanding this, that number gets smaller and smaller the longer we go without a rate adjustment.
That's right.
Is that correct? All right. Yeah. Is that an ideal number for percentage of budget? Is there a target that we want to have available for ENR, or?
Well, you need to have enough money there to do the projects that you anticipate needing to do.
So there's no standard benchmark for, you want 22% of your budget to be available to do this.
No, okay. What we'll do is we'll be looking at the capital improvement plan to see what projects we could or couldn't do in a specific year. The other thing about ENR is if we have a year where the revenue falls off dramatically, then we may have to spend down from cash or delay projects.
Okay, and I'm not sure if this question is still relevant or not, but I'll ask it anyway. All right, so let's suppose thank you for doing the cost of service study that actually generated a lot more discussion among constituents than I thought it would. Let's say that passes in early 2022, I think you said, and we adjust our rates not long after that. How long will it take for us to get back to a level we want? Are we that far off? Will it take years? Will it take a year? And I appreciate what you said about it depends on what we want to accomplish in a given year. But I think we all feel that the pressure, no pun intended, around water mains.
Well, certainly. And actually, if you look at this table, if you look at ENR in 2020, even though we had a large decline in revenue, we spent more in ENR in 2020 than we are this year or will next year. A lot of that's because once those projects are started and the work is being done, we're going to do the project and pay for it out of cash, which may mean at the beginning of the next year, in this case 2021, there just wasn't that much cash left. So that's part of why 2021 is low this year. But back to your more specifically to the question, the way we do this is at the time that we do the rate case, and once the rate case is approved, which actually could happen as soon as September or October, if we achieve a settlement with the other parties, we could settle that thing before the end of the year, in which case we could put it into effect before the end of the year. The IURC has until February to finally rule on it. So that's why we're planning on that calendar. Basically what happens is once we get approval and enact the tariff, then what will happen is we'll be coming to council for a bond to pay for a significant chunk of the project. So we will spin the projects up right away, especially the ones at the plant. And then the water main replacement, the first year of water main replacement will be partially funded from the bond, but then the rest of the water main replacement will all be funded, on a pay-go basis as we continue forward.
All right, we are over time here.
Way over time.
Sorry.
My apologies. So.
All right, if you could unshare that screen. Thank you. Councilmember Boland.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Kelson, thanks for the presentation as always. One thing that has come up in listening to this discussion, I wonder, did Kirkwood suffer some of the worst of the flooding because it has more commercial or just it's a more densely built place? Or did we happen to just locate part of our downtown over one of the most flood prone, problematic places that we could within the city limits? What's your take on that?
That's a good question. The answer is yes, a little bit of both. First of all, the corner of Kirkwood and Dunn is one of the low spots. It's a real low spot.
The low spots in the city, you mean?
In the region, and certainly in that watershed. So it's a place where a lot of water can get there in the first place. And then in the second place, the whole area is built out. So there's streets and buildings everywhere. If you go to IU, they've added, since the culvert was built in the 1920s, the existing culvert was built, there's been a lot of parking lots built over at IU, not always with the tension associated with them. So as the whole area has built out over that 100 and some odd years, its ability to hold back water has declined. And then you couple with that these very large storms that we've received the last several years, especially that storm in June. It all combines together to make a really difficult situation. We'll finish the Hidden River project. We'll add the upstream inlet for the Hidden River project after that. And we'll be conducting the modeling study to see how bad that storm might hurt us if it came back again. And try to get some ideas about what additional things we might need to do or whether that infrastructure would be sufficient to contain a storm like that.
So do you think that the project you're working on isn't really going to bear full fruit until that inlet is put in?
It won't fully yet reach its full fruition until that's completed. That's right.
And where's the exact location of the inlet that you have to install?
It's right there at Indiana, where well, I call it Clear Creek, Jordan River, Campus River, whatever you want to call it.
So basically
It's
between
right there.
Kirkwood and 6th.
That's right. Yeah, nearly at 6th and Kirkwood, over there near Franklin Hall. You can see where the creek comes up to the up to the road. There's an inlet there.
Yeah. All right. Well, looking forward to seeing that installed. Thank you.
And by the way, we've accelerated the planning for that project. We're starting the engineering study for the design of that. Even as we speak, we had a meeting about it today. And it will
My
affect
time is
both
up,
us.
so.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
I guess mine is too, sorry.
So I wanted to ask a second round question, and that is about the stormwater in a broad sense, and how CBU views green infrastructure. Do you consult perhaps with city planning and others in engineering in the city as far as a green space and maintaining a green space where possible in the city in order to mitigate stormwater impacts?
I don't know that we're really that much involved in green space per se. When there are projects that would affect it, we do get an opportunity to talk with the other departments about green infrastructure and how that could improve our stormwater situation. Eventually, we're going to have to start looking at some more downstream types of projects as well that could definitely benefit from either expanding green space or taking advantage of existing green space. Specifically on retaining green space, that's really not part of our process, but we certainly work with other departments to take advantage of green space when we can to manage stormwater.
As far as you know, is there an inventory of public green space in the city?
That I don't know. And I'm sure Parks has an inventory of Parks properties, and we have an inventory of ours, but I don't know specifically about a green space inventory. Certainly for things that are like this. Councilmember Rollo brought up the Deer Park project. That's actually not on our property. That was actually the Deer Park management folks agreed to allow us to put detention there to protect that neighborhood. And that may be another model going forward for how we can deal with these kinds of things.
I can ask at Planning and Transportation on Thursday. Thank you.
Thank
Are
you.
there other questions for Mr. Kelson before we go to the public? Yes, Councilmember Smith.
Thank you. Mr. Kelson, considering annexation and the potential expansion of the boundaries, can you talk a little bit about what the potential impact on rates for consumers and or your budget?
It really, for water and sewer, it won't affect very much at all because we're already, the customers we have we have customers inside the city and outside the city. We'll lose a little bit of revenue on the sewer side because outside city sewer customers pay a little bit more. So that revenue would go down a little bit. On the stormwater side, we would start collecting the stormwater fee from all the residences in the areas that are annexed. So that would increase our stormwater revenue and also increase our stormwater budget at the same time.
Is there a certain charge that do people have to hook on to the sewer if they're annexed?
Actually, they have to. If there's the way the rules work, the law, the state law actually is that if you're on a septic tank and your house is 300 feet from a sewer main, then if your septic tank fails, you can't put a new one in. You have to connect to the sewer. So that's the rule, whether you're in the city or not. So the issue there is proximity of a particular dwelling to an existing sewer main. Now, if new developments happen or if neighborhoods decide they want to add sewer to their neighborhoods and then we build extensions into those neighborhoods, then people would have to connect up to that the day we put them in about a little over half of them would have to connect, and then the others would connect over time as their septic tanks failed.
And do you have how much is it to hook onto a sewer line for the consumer?
Our connection fee is $2,800, or right around $2,800. That includes a system development charge for increasing plant capacity over time. In the case where you have a septic tank, and this is true in the city as well, if you remove a septic tank and properly decommission it, we will waive the sewer connection fee, that $2,800, because it will actually pay for it out of the stormwater utility, because septic is a huge risk for stormwater. So we've been doing that. Anything that if the water that lands on your property flows into the city's MS4, we'll offer that connection fee waiver.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Any further questions from council members on the utilities budget? All right, seeing none, we'll go to the public. If there's any member of the public who would like to make a comment about the budget proposal from City of Bloomington Utilities, you can use the raise hand function in Zoom, or you can send a note via chat to the meeting host, and Ms. Lacey will facilitate.
I do not have any takers in the chat or, well, I also do not have any in the with a raised hand.
All right, we'll give it just another moment. Still nothing, Ms. Lacey?
Still nothing.
All right, thank you. We'll come back to council members for debate and comment on the CBU budget. Would anybody like to make a comment? Councilmember Rollo.
Thank you. Well, Director Kelson, I think you do an extraordinary job at utilities, and as has already been commented, there's so many moving parts there, it's mind-boggling. And I think we're well placed for keeping the quality of water as to the extraordinary quality that it is. And I'm very satisfied with the various projects. I look forward to talking to you more about funding for the Lake Monroe watershed, and because that seems to be a very important project moving forward, since we're using that as our water source. It's important to keep it clean from the essentially the upstream. So I appreciate your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Other council member comments? All right. Seeing none, I will entertain a do pass motion.
Move to pass.
Second.
All right. I will just call your name as I see it. Councilmember Scambaluri.
Yes.
Councilmember Sandberg.
Yes.
Councilmember Sims.
Yes.
Councilmember Flaherty.
Yes.
Councilmember Volan.
Yes.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Councilmember Rosenbarger.
Yes.
Councilmember Rollo.
Yes.
And I also vote yes. So we have a do pass recommendation for the CBU budget of 900. Thank you very much, Mr. Kelson.
So much. Have a good night.
And now we are moving on to the Bloomington Fire Department with Chief Jason Moore. So Ms. Lacey, how much time do we have for this presentation?
20 minutes have been allotted for this presentation.
Thank you. And Chief Moore, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and start.
Good evening. My name is Jason Moore. I'm the fire chief of the city of Bloomington. And this is my 6th presentation to this council, and I want to go ahead and start with thanking you for your prior commitment to our department. When we talk about why we exist, you got to see a lot of examples with the past flooding, with COVID, and I don't have to explain this very well for people to understand, but we provide excellent public safety, and then we do that through fire prevention, public education, emergency management, mitigation. But this past year has really kind of altered our mission a little bit. Obviously, there's a lot of things we can do that fit within the mission of saving lives. So with COVID and everything else, we've really gotten out into a branch of public health. And that will be something that we discuss in this 2022 presentation. Before I go on, I also want to make sure that we thank all of our firefighters who have dealt with a lot of things that have been thrown at them. You know, between floods, COVID, the normal workload, everything has continued, and we never stopped providing services to all the citizens during all these trying times. Our background, there are 110 full-time equivalents. We operate out of 4 divisions, which in 2022, I will be discussing how we may alter that slightly. But operations, which is the big red trucks, the people who are out responding, training and education are those who prepare all of our operational firefighters. Prevention and investigation, we're going to be combining, but prevention is really that getting out, educating, and making sure that people understand how to prevent risk. And it's not just fires anymore, it's all risk. And then obviously investigation is we want to, if something does go wrong, figure out why it went wrong and how we can prevent that from going wrong again. Our major initiatives, we talk about community risk reduction. You know, we are not just in the business of responding anymore. We want to start identifying those risks and saving lives before they're ever in danger. We have tried many innovative emergency response solutions over the years, everything from the smaller SUV, different equipment packages, and even to the point of how we're dispatching our firefighters now. These are all innovations that are supposed to improve efficiency and leave us open to do our primary mission. We've talked about in the past how workforce diversification is an issue for us. It will continue to be on our agenda. In fact, this is one of those things that just never go away. You always learn, you always grow, you always get better to make sure that you are representing the community you serve. If you can notice between the flooding and some others, some of you contacted me, but station renovations, capital replacement, we're very proud that for the first time in most likely several decades that we are operating out of an entirely new fleet from frontline vehicles. They are all standardized and it makes our jobs way easier. And we're now moving on to those really big things like fire stations and improving the quality of life for the firefighters and for everyone that we go out and serve. Enhanced employee training and education. Again, that's been a big thing since we've been here, drastically improving our hours. We're constantly reviewing that, revising it. We're not just happy with status quo. We want to make sure that we are getting better. And then obviously firefighter safety and health. We want to take care of those that are serving our community. So 2021 budget goal updates, our emergency operations. We want to provide an appropriate response. We were pointed out during our state of the public safety that our metrics were off. We have identified that, we have fixed that, and you will see a correction in our 2022 budget goals that will align with how we want to report these things. And it'll also explain why, when our stats look like they're off, why we're still being successful. We are currently working on a written 5-year strategic plan. As far as we can tell, this department has never really had a written strategic plan. There was one attempt with a prior chief many, many years ago, but this is important for us that it's not just up in our heads. We want to get community input, obviously council input, and we want to make sure that we think about things like annexation and where we're going to be more than just right now. We are done with this year's capital replacements, but we are constantly going to make sure that we stay ahead of this so we do not fall behind and have our fleet and other equipment get to the point where it is in dire need and almost dangerous to use. And obviously continuing major renovation projects at the fire stations. A few of those projects are on hold because of the flooding, but we are still working on improving some of the stations and getting ahead of some of our maintenance issues. For fire prevention, after all this is done between annexation and the budget hearings, we do plan on bringing an updated fire ordinance to the council for approval. This has been very well thought out. It has to go through a lot of steps at the state before we can even bring it back local for approval. But essentially, we want to put some teeth back in prevention, and we really want to start enforcing what is available for us to enforce to drive down the calls that we're dealing with that are actually pulling away resources that should be better used somewhere else. We've had a goal of making a contact with every business every year. We have never met that goal, but that does not mean it is not important. We will not continue to try to meet that goal. And obviously, COVID taught us that we need to be more innovative in our solutions to make sure we can get education out to all the schools and into university. And I will tell you that all of those investments are paying off. In fact, over the past 5 years, we've had a 31% reduction in fires. It also gets into 11 confirmed saves. And everything that we're doing is making a major impact for the fact that we've had 0 fire fatalities in the past 4 years. Training and education. We mentioned that we have diversity initiatives, and it's not just good enough to talk about it. We need to constantly be reminded of it, understanding what is going right, what is going wrong, and how we can be better. We have a goal of ensuring 100% of our employees receive diversity inclusion training by the end of the year. And short of a few that were on leave or vacation, we're almost near that goal. In fact, I know Director Kelson mentioned that they're having some of that training. We do have a few employees that will be going that direction to make sure they receive that training. We want to make sure we maintain training hours. You know, it's not just good enough to get over the goal, get the certification and say, I know everything. It's a very complicated job. It's constantly changing, altering, building construction, everything that goes into our job. We want to make sure that we're staying proficient at. And then we're working on analyzing responses to look at the overall effectiveness and start looking at those corrective training programs. For investigations, we've already met all of those goals. The continuing hours of education for investigation personnel, again, making sure that they understand what they're looking for, trends, analysis, all of that. The innovative solutions, we have 360 camera if we need it. You know, we've got a lot of solutions that have been working with that. You know, for the first time that I am aware of, we were able to use footage from our thermal imagers as evidence. So those are all really, really important things. So let's get into our 2022 budget goals. Emergency operations, again, we're excellent around the clock, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You see things like the picture here. A lot of people don't realize that we do a lot more than fire. I will also point out that as we go on and we start talking about strategic planning, I would really encourage all of you to read the 21st Century Fire and Emergency Service Report that was published last year. That is something that was developed that is kind of guiding and should let us know which directions we should be thinking on a national level that we can start implementing at a local level to get ahead of some of our community trends. So this is some of the updated things that I talked about. The standards you see on the screen now, which look at turnout time, travel time, the travel time of the total response, this is directly out of the National Fire Protection Association standards. This is also directly what the ISO evaluators look for. Turnout time is from the time we receive the call from dispatch until we get on the trucks. You'll notice that there is a difference between structure fire calls, the other emergencies, and EMS calls. The big deal is it takes longer to put on the fire gear. Travel time is pretty much the same for most of them, and that is from the time we leave the station until we arrive on scene. We're shooting for 90% of the time on structure fire calls, and we're looking at the 4 minutes or less, 90% of the time for EMS calls. The travel time for all other emergencies, understanding that a lot of these may not be as emergent, there is a 5 minute or less time. And then what I really want to point out on this is the total response force. A municipal fire service is successful not only because of how quickly they get there, but also how quickly all of us get there. So when we talk about where stations are located, how far apart they are, it's not just the immediate area, it's how close the other resources get there. If there is a significant delay in that second time that we're really looking at, you have a lot of bad outcomes. So by maintaining these, looking at how we're doing on these are the legitimate national standards that we are trying to reach. And with that, we should continue to see positive outcomes. We also want to look at developing a quality assurance program. One of the positions that we've asked for this year is an assistant chief of administration planning. We have always wanted to do this. We just lacked the actual capacity. So this position will be tasked with reviewing 100% of the calls that require second alarm or greater. And what that means is If we get there and we realize we need more resources than what we initially sent, that's the second alarm. We also want to make sure that we're fully looking at anything that had a fatality or a firefighter near miss. And then again, a lot of what we do is EMS or other calls. We want to start reviewing 10% of those that require an intervention. Intervention being a medication or some type of treatment. We obviously want to continue our efforts to increase interoperability with other fire agencies within Monroe County and the state of Indiana. For fire prevention investigations, I mentioned that we were kind of combining these two divisions from our previous goals. A lot of this comes down to that you created that fire marshal position with the deputy fire marshal. And it makes a lot of sense for those that are helping prevent fires. We're also the ones that are investigating those fires, that it's all kind of grouped into one division. So this is now a seamless thing that we're looking at where we're going to investigate 100% of the fires. We're going to make sure we're making those community contacts. We're getting out to the schools, working with the Red Cross. We looked at installing smoke detectors or replacing batteries. 88% of fire fatalities historically within the city of Bloomington were in areas that did not have working smoke detectors. So it is important to us that we maintain and we continue to forward that mission. For training and education, great picture here. This was from some of our diversity training that we just completed. But not only do we want to focus on what we need to be operationally sound, we also want to look at things we could do reduce firefighter injuries, enhance the department diversity, and ensure the safety of our community. So again, we're going to make sure we provide that 420 hours per firefighter, 24 hours of EMS training. We're sticking with the 100% of employees receive diversity inclusion training. We want to make sure we're hosting classes from outside the Southern Indiana region. There are a lot of trends and things that happen that maybe don't affect us right now, but we could be learning from outside entities and just seeing what the rest of the world's dealing with. And because we do have a lot of new people, making sure we're providing instruction on the 40 new certifications. That is part of our plan that we have, the career progression plan and promotion guide, so that we continue to build and invest in our employees. The last section I saved a lot of my time for because it is new. It is something that if you read that 21st Century Fire Emergency Service Report, if you look at how our community has changed, even over the 5 years I've been here, there is obviously something that has changed. And you cannot continue to use the same tools. You cannot continue to approach problems the same way. And our department is embracing this community care as being a part of our mission. I told you it was easy because the fact is this will save lives. What we're asking for in this is 2 positions that will start looking at some of those chronic and short-term medical conditions. We go to calls where, if it had just been properly managed medications, we would have never been there. We go to calls where someone has a crisis and there is no follow-up care. Working with our community partners and making sure that this isn't just a spin-off, a new thing that we're doing on our own out to the side. This is going to be fully integrated. We're going to be working with the police department, with their social workers, with their community service specialists, and all the other entities that are out there that are already trying to help people. What is different about this, and this is what we were going to refer to as a mobile integrated healthcare, is that we want to be there before and we want to be there after. And what we can focus on for at least year 1 is to start looking at those high users of the system, the ones that are called, people call 911 a lot for. We can also look at a lot of things that we know that there are long-term solutions already in the community that we just need to get people connected with. So we do have 2 goals related to this new division with our department. We want to fully establish that mobile integrated healthcare program by Q2. There is an entire state process to do that. If approved, we will go ahead and start that state process this year using Recover Forward money that was already allocated. And then we will not call it a success until we actually have the 2 community care coordinators. We've integrated them again. This is not a spinoff, is not just us doing our own thing off the side. We really want to be integrated with those existing providers. And then we need to make sure we're actually providing care. So it's one thing to say we're going to do great things. It's another to actually have proof of people we've helped. And then because this is getting us into this medical world beyond just the emergency medical, we want to make sure we evaluate the potential and feasibility of maybe having a billing service. We're not talking about billing people that are using the service, but maybe going through their insurance to see if we can recoup any of the cost of doing these extra things for these people. There is money in there from Recover Forward Phase 3, that is the American Rescue Plan Act. $375,000 has been allocated for operational revenue replacement. And what that brings us to is our budget highlights. Our overall budget is almost $13 million. That is an increase of 5%. Some of the big things, we have 2% increases for our union employees. That was negotiated and agreed upon. And then for non-union employees, it has been announced that there's a 2.75% increase. The other big portion of why Category 1 went up, there is the positions we've already talked about, the Assistant Chief of Administration and Planning, those 2 community care coordinators, but there is also a part-time administrative assistant. A long time ago, our administrative assistant we currently have was the part-time. When she moved up to full-time, the part-time was never backfilled. So this is reestablishing some much needed help for payrolls, claims, and just generalized work that we're doing. Our supply request is a decrease of 13%. A lot of the things that we've been buying, the large apparatus, the new equipment, we're caught up. We just want to make sure we stay in that replacement cycle so we don't get behind again. But we do see those decreases because we're buying a lot of new equipment with the apparatus. Category 3 is it's a little bit of a tricky one with our 2 budget lines or funds that we use, which is the general fund and the PS lit. It shows a decrease of 28%. If I could just go back, the $375,000 for operational revenue replacement is solely dedicated to Category 3 if approved. So that is actually a $45,000 increase overall. And the big thing that we're adding in that is a athletic trainer for our firefighters. We're making sure they're healthy when we bring them on, and we want to make sure we continue to bring them, keep them healthy. We also want to make sure that we improve those return to works after injuries, and we're preventing injuries so that we can help with some of the stated goals from risk of reducing those workers' compensation claims. Category 4, obviously in the fire department, that's where a lot of our money goes to, is these big capital items. In line 442, that's replacement of radios and radio equipment. We have been buying a lot of radios with the apparatus when we replace them, but in some of the leaner years, we had to move older radios over. We just want to make sure that we stay on top of that and we have good functioning equipment. There is also a desire to have some mobile repeaters and other enhancements to our radio network to handle some of our dead spots. For motor equipment, there's $150,000 to replace the brush truck. That does go out into areas like Lake Griffey, some of the parks. In fact, it's been moved down to Station 5 and has helped us out a lot in Switchyard Park. There's $100,000 for replacing the confined space rescue truck. We are a confined space rescue entity for the city, for IU, and for CVU. And just for your awareness, when we talk about whether we should do it or not, there's about 97 confined spaces that we're aware of just on IU campus alone. For the other capital outlays, there's $600,000 for station updates. And then I really wanted to take a moment to talk about this joint engineering ITS project. It seems, kind of cryptic, but what that is a study that will help us build computer models that will help us answer some very hard questions like, where do fire stations go? What happens if we want to put traffic calming devices in these areas? Right now, we go out and we spend a lot of time driving these, evaluating that. This will build a computer model to help us answer those questions. Overall, you can see it is a 5% increase that we are asking for. And there is the ARPA funds, the 375 that we've already talked about. And with that, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank our firefighters for the work they do every day. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Chief Moore. And before we go into questions, I just want to remind both my colleagues and the chief and other staff who may be answering questions that we do want to stick to 3 minutes per round. That includes the question and the answer. All right. I think I saw Councilmember Sims first.
Thank you. Thank you, Jason, or Chief Moore, for the presentation. And please thank all of our officers for their service. And even our non-officer personnel. It takes a lot to keep a good fire department going. In your 5 years, we've had a lot of discussion about diversity within the ranks of your department. And I'd just like if you could speak on that just for a second. What are some of your recruitment goals along those lines? And also, I'm interested in upward mobility opportunities for many in your department, but specifically for potentially for diverse individuals.
Great. Great questions, and I'm more than happy to talk about this. So we've talked about our struggles, and some of our struggles in the past have been really kind of how the state outlined where we had to recruit from. So when I got here 5 years ago, we had to be within this county or a contiguous county. Last year, they changed where it had to be within 50 miles. And this year, they went all out and said there are no longer any residency requirements. You just have to have a phone and a vehicle that can get you to work. With that being said, if you looked at all of our surrounding communities that we were kind of limited to in the past, you add those all together, we were on par with what that demographic looks like. We're now able to recruit anywhere in the state. The last process we went through, we drastically improved. When I got here, I think the hiring process was about a 2.2% diversity profile. This last one that we went through was significantly higher. We just had our largest and most diverse recruit class ever go through. And just to put it on par so that we have these numbers out, when we did some of our diversity training, we got a survey of what the current diversity is. And we're sitting around 12%. And that considers the 6 ethnic minorities, the 5 that identify as female, and 2 LGBTQ plus members. We are constantly out looking where we can recruit better. And again, when I got here, it was an article in the Herald Times for one day. We are doing a lot of outreach, going out to minority-owned businesses, getting out into the community, and really, we're really happy with the fact that we now have enough diversity where we can have a diversity committee to help us think about where else we can go.
Okay, thank you very much. In the 30 seconds or so, 20 seconds left, we talked about homegrown opportunities through the Hoosier Hills training and that sort of thing with some of our younger folks. How is that going? You got about 10 seconds, sorry.
Yep, 10 seconds, I can do this. We continue to support Hoosier Hills wholly, and we have been encouraged not only through Hoosier Hills, but Ivy Tech to bring better diversity to those programs.
Thank you, did great, thank you.
All right, Councilmember Sandberg.
Thank you, Chief Moore. I want to appreciate publicly the personal tour you took me on after the flood, where I got to see the old headquarters, and then you were starting to move into your new digs. So my question is, how's that going? How are you recovering? And what's the status?
Well, first off, thank you for coming out. And I'll extend that invitation to any council member that wants to see. The damage at the old headquarters, as we're calling it now, is still substantial. We're still waiting on damage estimates for some parts of that. And the other thing that we're identifying is the longer that it's sitting there, the more that we're getting to dig into it, the worse it is. So it's not just the flood damage. Potentially we're getting mold testing done now. I don't know if any of you have gone by there, but it is constantly outpouring water from the sump pumps. So something has happened where if the sump pumps stop running, that basement will fill back with water pretty quickly. The new, what we're calling temporary headquarters, because it is not our permanent location, it is up and running, 100% operational at this point. So we do have a temporary bay. If you're walking by the beeline, you'll see it. We do have all of the firefighters that run on the engine, the squad, the battalion that are here 24 hours a day now. We are very well settled into it, and we want to thank everyone that had to really work hard to make that happen. I just attended an international conference. And when you talk with your peers around the country about losing a headquarters station and within 6 weeks have a fully operational station back, it's hard for a lot of them to even try to believe that. So it took a lot of innovation. It took a lot of hard work, especially on behalf of the station captain from headquarters, Deputy Chief Washell, and a lot of others. But we are settled in, and we are now in a place where we can calm down and start thinking about what the next steps are without having to rush.
Yeah, again, thank you. And I want to thank you too for your description of how not only did you have people coming in all hands on deck trying to rescue equipment and stuff from your headquarters, but also how you were helping the other individuals in the area who were also suffering in the really intense flood. So thank you very much.
Questions? Remember, we're on question period. So are there questions for Chief Moore? Councilmember Rallo.
Thank you, Chief Moore. My question is sort of a perennial one, and that is, and it has to do with your focus on response time, which I appreciate, and I'm very pleased to see that 96% are within 8 minutes. My question has to do with facilities anticipating future development, which would likely be in the southwest quadrant of the city, and wedded with annexation. I'm concerned about capacity. I know that for many decades now, we've been talking about a future facility on the southwest side. I assume that's still a need. Could you talk about, are there discussions planning for future facilities like that?
Yes, I'd like to refer you to our 10-year plan. There are a lot of stations on that 10-year plan. They are in that last column without a date at this point. Obviously, things like headquarters flooding changed the dynamic of what we were looking at. We did have an engineering study completed a couple of years ago that I identified several of our stations that were due for replacement. And that's part of why we're really kind of waiting on this 5-year plan to see how this annexation plays out. There are a lot of I'll say interesting things with our department. There are protective laws that have been passed. We don't know if they apply. We do know that if the annexation does go through as it has been portrayed now, that we will have to see some growth. When we get into where stations go and how stations go, I think there's a lot that has to come down to that protective law. If our boundaries are forever fixed, so to speak, that will be way different than if we're planning on future growth and other annexation opportunities potentially in the future. What I will tell you is these are not snap decisions. These are, when you look at them, those are 50 to 75-year buildings that you plan on. So it's not just what do we need now, it's where do we think the community is going to grow. And I will tell you that we are constantly considering where stations should be and if we're properly staffed.
Thank you for that, and I'll look to your 10-year plan. Thank you.
Thank you. I will take a bite of the apple since we're talking about the 10-year plan. That was where my question lies. The capital plan shows $300,000 for Station 1 repairs and $300,000 for Station 2 repairs in 2022. Now, certainly for Station 1, the downtown station, that seems not enough to recover from the flood. So could you speak to that a little bit and what other capital expenditures we might need to make soon?
No, absolutely. We are still balancing out what may be an insurance claim. Obviously, we want to be smart about it. The overall, it's $600,000 that we're looking for stations. They originally earmarked for 1 and 2. If it turns out that Station 1 is not feasible, then we would just jump ahead on Station 2 or some of the other stations that have needs. But you're right. We're already at over $500,000 for damage estimates on that building. So we're at a point now is, is it even a valuable investment in that structure? I will tell you that the mayor mentioned it, that kind of all options are on the table. By us getting settled in a temporary headquarters, we can now think strategically about this. We can also wait until annexation is settled, because if it changes our footprint, it would change where stations need to go. And we're not opposed to thinking even beyond just duplicating what we had. The fire station itself needs to be in a particular place, but not headquarters. The admin staff could be anywhere. So we're looking at a lot of different aspects and a lot of different pieces, but you are right. 300,000 is not enough to take care of what's going on at Station 1 at this point. That is just going off of the plan that was built by the engineers that did the station evaluation. And we are trying to follow that plan until we know any different or any better.
All right, thank you for that explanation. Councilmember Flaherty.
Thank you. Sorry, my hand I feel is blurred sometimes with my blurred background. Thank you, Chief Moore, for the presentation, and thank you to everyone on with the fire department for their service. Absolutely. Wanted to follow up though on one of the newer programs, the Ask for Community Care program, and establishing that. I noted in your memo that this will be following the state's mobile integrated healthcare program. I was wondering if you could tell us just a bit more about what the state requirements are, how that's structured. One of the, I think, goals highlighted is a focus on preventing 911 calls for service by working with other service providers and addressing issues that may need not be a 911 call necessarily. So yeah, if you could explain a little more about the program, how its success will be measured, and maybe some of the best practices from other communities or other departments in relation to that have helped guide this decision and request.
Great. Well, great question, and I really appreciate it. So the state has an entire application process. In April of this year, it was just published, and that is there to help guide departments like ours that want to get into this business, that think that it would serve our community. What really goes into it is a lot of what we've already done to have emergency medical service. So we have to have a doctor that supports us, a medical director. We have to have policies, procedures. We actually have to build all of the metrics of success. And this is not just one of those that you just pick a number out of the air and say, I think we're going to do this year. So part of this process between now and the time we can implement it is seeing what the current capacities are at the emergency room, the use of 911 system, and it goes beyond just our fire department. We only respond to critical care calls. The ambulance service is overloaded as well. So our standards and metrics are going to be looking at, for first year, is targeting that low-hanging fruit, so to speak, the high users of the system. If we could handle at least the top 10 users of the 911 service that the Bloomington Fire Department responds to, it could reduce several hundred calls a year. So taking that to the next step of how do we integrate, how do we look at what success looks like. I'm not interested necessarily in the revolving door. How many people did we serve? I'd love to see how many people we actually improve their lives. A lot of social service programs get into this. How many people did we see? How many people do we serve? I am more interested in actually making a change, improving somebody's life, and getting them so that they're not constantly stepping into that emergency service safety net that exists for true, legitimate emergencies.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Are there other questions for Chief Moore? Yes, Councilmember President Sims.
Are we still in the first round or second round? Or does it matter? You're muted. I'm sorry.
Yeah, yours was the only hand I saw, so go for it.
Okay, I just wanted to follow up a little bit, Chief Moore, on it might have been part of the community care coordinators, but you were talking about a billing service through the insurance. And you said this wasn't an individual billing, but rather through their insurance. Is that, and then you said it was for extra things. And I wasn't clear on what those extra things were. I don't know the process of billing someone's, like I may not get billed, but you may bill my insurance company. Am I saying this correctly? That seems, well, I'll just let you explain.
Yeah, so I think the easiest thing to say is when you start talking about billing, a lot of people get really concerned that they're already paying taxes. Now we're double charging. What this is this goes beyond the scope of our department. And there are a lot of programs out there that help make these programs sustainable, and they do look at insurance billing. So it's not only looking at whether they have insurance or not, it's helping certain people to get insurance so that they can receive the medical care that they need. So when I say that we're not billing directly to people, if we come out, I'm not going to send that person a bill. What I say for above and beyond, we are chartered to do emergency medical service at this point. When we get into those pre-cares and post-cares, that's kind of out of our scope a little bit, but it does get into that scope of that public health programming, which is billable under certain insurance programs. So again, that's why I'm saying we got to look at the feasibility. We got to make sure that we can recoup costs and then look at the cost of what it would take to actually bill people and try to recoup those costs to make sure that we're not digging a deeper hole by providing the service.
So have you had discussions with our local healthcare providers? Otherwise, you're right, this is a bit beyond the scope of BFD at this point. And it's a little bit concerning, but maybe because I just don't understand it. If you could elaborate just a bit more, you got about 45 seconds.
Yes, absolutely. We are constantly in contact with other community providers. In fact, this cannot be successful if IU Health and our current medical providers do not back it. What I will tell you is that there are a lot of incentives to fund these types of programs through the Affordable Care Act. So it is an extension of our services, but if you read that 21st century, it is the evolution of the fire service. We are already properly prepared, primed, and we're already halfway to doing a lot of this because we are medically trained already. So I will take some of those concerns that we're concerned about those as well. And we will make sure that we have a lot of guidance from the state and other people that have already established these programs to make sure we don't make missteps.
Thank you. We're out of time. Thank you for your response.
All right, are there other questions for Chief Moore? Yes, Councilmember Bolin. Sorry, I didn't see the raised hand.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, Chief Moore. Thanks again for another good presentation. Always encouraged to see the department making progress. One thing I wanted to know about was I understand that the ISO has been reviewing us again this year, and I was hoping for news. Has the ISO rendered a decision on what our rating will be?
I am too very anxious. We're approaching the window that they gave where they would make a decision. After our discussions, they told us that we should be happy with it, but they will not tell us exactly what that score is. I do know, looking at the math that goes behind all of this, we definitely will not lose any ground, and I do anticipate an improved rating. But again, I can't promise it until it's actually awarded.
So just to be sure we understand what's at stake here, ISO rates from a low of 10 to a high of 1, and we're currently at a 2. Is that right?
That is correct. 5 years ago, we were 3, borderline 4, actually. We were just a few points away from being that 4. And we are now a borderline 1 with the improvements in equipment, response packages, dispatch, everything that's been invested over the years, even training. We should see an increase in our points. And if it is successful, we would be one of the only ISO ones that are outside of that Indianapolis, Marion County area.
Can you say how many fire departments are an ISO 1 in the state?
I believe the last count I heard that there was only 2 or 3 total.
And you say some of them are in the Indianapolis metro area. Can you name them?
I think the very first ISO 1 in the state was Pike Township. And that was actually when we got our ISO evaluated to a 2. So that was the very first one in the state of Indiana to begin with. The other 2, I'm not sure just off of the top of my head. I don't try to compare ourselves to other departments. I try to make sure that we are doing the best we can for our community, and that we're making sure we're making solid investments, not just chasing a magic number, so to speak.
Well, I appreciate that you do that. I just want to say that I don't feel the need to do that. I'm very happy to compare us to other communities in this respect when it's warranted. So I thank you for the information, and I have my fingers crossed for an excellent bit of news. Thank you.
All right, are there other questions for Chief Moore? Councilmember Smith.
I would just like to follow up Chief Moore and ask, will you explain a little bit about what impact the ISO rating has on the community?
Absolutely. So ISO looks at the differences between the fire protection, water systems, and dispatch. And what it does is it scores you against your community. So for an ISO 1, I can't promise that they're going to reduce insurance rates. What I can tell you is that the lower that number, the less that certain buildings need to invest to make sure that they have low insurance rates. ISO also grades our community as a whole up to a certain size or square footage of a building. So when you get into giant buildings, things like the Cook or even like Walmart's, they're so big they get their own ISO rating. So an ISO 1 is a benchmark in a city or in a fire department that shows that we are adequately meeting all of the needs of all the different types of structures up to that square footage limit. And it is heavily reliant on not only the firefighters, their training, everything that we do on the prevention side. It also has to look at the water side, which Director Kelson has been great at helping us improve the water system as well. So, and then obviously dispatch, all calls start with dispatch. If there's missteps at that step, it kind of goes down the entire chain. So what I can tell you it means is that this department is doing their job. And when we're graded against our community threat by the insurance service offices, they're saying that we are the best at doing what we're doing versus the threat that we are facing.
Thank you for clarifying that for me. I appreciate it. Keep up the good work, guys. Yeah.
All right, I will jump in with a question. Chief Moore, have there been any changes in regard to mutual aid or automatic aid with other fire service providers? I guess it's basically the Monroe Fire Protection District.
There have been no changes over the years. We still maintain a mutual aid agreement where if they need help, they can call us. A great example that hit the newspaper was the 5 homes over in an area intended for annexation. They did call for our help, and we did send quite a few resources to go help them with that. So we still have those agreements, and we still use them when we need it. During the flood, they came within city limits and helped us on a lot of our calls. So there have been no changes on that, no progress towards an automatic aid. And this is still working out. We're not seeing bad outcomes because we're not running together on all these calls.
Thank you. Are there any final questions for Chief Moore before we go to the public? All right, seeing none. If a member of the public would like to make a comment on the budget proposal from the Bloomington Fire Department, please use the raise hand function in Zoom, or you can type a message into the chat to the meeting host. And Ms. Lacey is helping us out with that tonight.
I see one raised hand, screen name Nathan Muchlar, and the person should be able to unmute.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Muchler. You'll have up to 2 minutes.
Thank you so much. Over the last year, no one that I've ever heard has said defund the fire department, and this is why. In fact, to relieve funding, to increase the funding available and to relieve and move funding from the police department and stress from BPD officers, I would encourage the council to continue to expand the scope of the fire department in this forward-thinking budget. This budget represents a department and structure that is moving towards a more just, equitable, and safe future. I applaud the focus on preventing 911 calls for service by working with other service providers to ensure that continuity of care and follow-up, which will definitely ensure individuals have a long-term solution. I would hope this council strongly endorses this budget and would ask you to consider if there are other positions proposed tonight that would be a better fit for Bloomington within the fire department. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public care to comment on the fire department budget?
There are no other raised hands, and I do not have any messages in the chat.
All right. Seeing no other public comments, we'll come back to council members for debate, comment on the BFD budget proposal. Would any of my colleagues want to comment? Oh, Councilmember Flaherty.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, just a few things. I appreciated all the updates and goals, especially around training and recruitment and diversity, and also very much support the efforts on the new community care program. I think I may still have a few follow-up questions in writing for following the budget process. I'm going to abstain tonight, but generally like what I see and feel supportive of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other council members? Well, then I will make a comment and say that I'm very excited about the new program initiative for the mobile integrated healthcare program. I think this is very forward thinking, and it makes sense to try to, instead of responding to multiple 911 calls, be more proactive and say, okay, we know a lot of 911 calls have to do with this community or this person or this situation, and try to have trained personnel to reach out and prevent those emergency situations by proactively helping, especially in medical circumstances. So I'm very excited to see that. And I hope the program approval process runs smoothly and we can get some additional training for our fire department officers to launch that next year. I guess that's all I had. Thank you very much, Chief Moore, for your leadership. And if there are no other comments, I'll entertain a do pass recommendation.
Move to pass.
Second.
All right. Councilmember Volin,
Yes.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes, sorry.
Councilmember Sims,
Yes.
Councilmember Rollo,
Yes.
Councilmember Flaherty,
Abstain.
Councilmember Scambaluri,
Yes.
Councilmember Rosenbarger,
Yes.
Councilmember Sandberg,
Yes.
and I will also vote yes. So that's a do pass recommendation of 801. Thank you again to Chief Moore and all of our firefighters.